Board of Selectmen meeting to order for Monday, March 25th, 2019, and as required by open meeting law, you are hereby informed that the town will be video and audio taping as well as live broadcasting the public meeting. In addition, anyone in the audience who plans to video or audio tape this meeting must notify the chairman prior to the start of the meeting. Hearing nobody, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening. Is there anyone for weekly briefing? Nobody? Anybody for public comments and announcements? Nobody. Okay. We'll move on to the consent agenda. Ed?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd like to present the consent agenda and move approval of the items thereon, including the minutes of February 25th regular session and March 4th regular session, and we're going to ask that item B be taken up separately immediately after the consent agenda, and approve the request money from the cable fund in the amount of $7,170 for the purchase of hearing room furniture to be placed in a newly designated hearing room space at the Harwich Community Center, formerly the Channel 18 studio.
Second.
Been seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Did you want to go on to?
Yeah, I'll move that we approve, the recommendation of the town administrator relative to a public hearing for a dangerous dog held on Wednesday, March 13th, 2019.
Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question.
Did you second?
I didn't.
Oh, sorry.
Second.
Second it.
You have a second.
I have a question directed at the town administrator. Because, I mean, none of us take this lightly. His pets tend to be like family members. So the question I have is, in the backup you gave us with the Mass General Law, it seems to indicate that no matter where the dogs are located, that the verdict will follow them.
That's correct.
So what was the point in taking the dogs and moving them to another jurisdiction then?
That wasn't my idea. In terms of, in this case, I think it's a couple of kind of significant points I think are worthwhile to at least comment on. We probably had about 10 neighbors show up, and these dogs were terrorizing the neighborhood, knocking down or attempting to knock down a woman that was carrying an infant, biting the infant, biting the lady repeatedly. Actually, one person had testified that one of the dogs actually burst into the screen door of his own kitchen and confronted him in his own kitchen. And, you know, I would say I've been doing dog hearings for a fair amount of time, and, you know, it's not generally the dogs, it's the owners. And in this case, the owners are, one owner departed, the other is, you know, pretty young, and the parents, who had been kind of absent, have decided to try to help with the dogs. So based upon the facts, I mean, the dog had bitten a UPS driver that went to the door. So the dog has repeated incidents, no opportunity for training or recourse for the folks that live there. And the mother had gotten remarried, and the new husband lives in Berkeley, Mass. And I did have a conversation with him over the phone and said that you know, it would be easy for people to evade dogs by just removing it from the community. So I informed him that any order of this board would be jurisdictional statewide. Our obligation is to provide to the Board of Selectmen in the town of Berkeley what happened here, and the dog owner, the husband that has the house out in Berkeley, was made aware of that, and he does have 10 days in which to appeal to Superior Court. So if the board votes this, he has a 10-day appeal, and it would be up to the Board of Selectmen in Berkeley to enforce the order for Harwich.
Don?
Yeah, two further questions. Was he made aware of the appeal process?
He was.
Okay, and secondly, because this is strange, I've never actually seen this, if the dog is now located somewhere else and it becomes the jurisdiction of their Board of Selectmen, the question that I have is, what court would they appeal it, since the ruling is here?
I believe it would be Superior Court in Barnstable that he would appeal it,
You have to come back
since
here.
the order came here. Yeah.
Okay.
And they still own the property in Harwich. The dogs have just been, I don't know, husband and wife, in which they have 2 houses, one in Harwich and one in Berkeley. So they've relocated the dogs.
Could I ask for a follow-up to what happens to this in the end? This case? So, so we understand what,
We would be notified if there's an appeal, and then we would have to defend the board's actions. The animal control officer would do that, so we can get a sense. The other thing is, we can send the notice to the selectmen in Berkeley. If the selectmen in Berkeley choose to enforce it, they can. If they choose not to. My experience is that if the dogs have been that poorly behaved, then they will resurface again in Berkeley with similar issues.
yeah.
We're just trying to prevent that from happening.
Happening, right. Is there any further conversation? Is there a motion?
There's a motion.
Well, you did
And-
make the
and I
motion.
seconded
You
it,
seconded
yeah.
it, so, any further discussion? No. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all opposed?
301.
Yes. So now we'll go on to, well, actually, Chris, do you want to take the other item ahead of, before we go to the public?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just, for the board, we do have a person that's visiting that has a young child, and I was just wondering if we could take the Affordable Housing Trust warrant article support, Article 61. I have 2 presenters, and if the board would indulge that, only because the
Sure.
child's 5 years old, and
Is everybody okay
instead
with
of
that?
having the,
Sure.
thank you for that.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello. Hi. So I think I've presented in front of you all before. I think you may all know me, but for the record, I'm Andrea Aldana. I'm the Director of Housing Advocacy at the Community Development Partnership, and we are a subcontract awardee of the town. We provide housing coordinator services, and I've brought my new colleague who's been around for maybe 2 weeks, Palinda Deegan, just because I want to introduce her to all of you. Palinda has been hired specifically to perform the housing coordinator services for the towns of Harwich and Chatham. And she's brand new, but I wanted you to see her face. She's already been conducting office hours for the past couple of weeks, so she'll be working under my guidance.
Great. Welcome.
And she knows everybody's name already.
We're getting there.
That was mine.
So, we are here to speak to Article 61. This is the article regarding parcels under consideration for housing development to help the town work towards its goal of having 10% of its housing stock be affordable. And the strategy here actually comes straight from the Housing Production Plan. Your very first strategy under housing production strategies is to continue to make suitable public property available for affordable housing. And so the trust, as one of its first orders of business, has identified some such parcels, and maps have been provided to you where these parcels are. There are 6 locations. Some of the locations have more than 1 parcel, but we think of them as 6 parcels just for the sake of brevity. Actually, one of the parcels on Depot Road is specifically cited in your housing production plan on page 95, which was interesting. And the parcels are all over town, so this is a scattered site strategy that has worked well for the town of Harwich, making sure that housing that's affordable to people who live here is spread across town and not concentrated in one place. The purpose of this article is to pursue development on these parcels. In order to do so, we need to transfer oversight of the parcels from the Board of Selectmen or the tax collector over to the jurisdiction of the Affordable Housing Trust so that they can pursue pre-development work that's typical for this process. 4 of the parcels also need to have their use changed from general municipal use to affordable housing. 2 of them have already been designated, I believe, in 2001 town meeting. And yeah, so the parcels need to be transferred so that the trust can do the feasibility studies that are a typical part of this process. There are 6 locations. So if we go through the handouts, you start with the Sisson Road parcel, which is where the Harwich Junior Theater is. Is there anything you want to say about the parcels as we go through the handouts, Chris?
No, I'm happy to have you do the presentation. I'm here all night.
Okay.
I think point out the ones that we need to have a change of use.
Yeah, so the ones that do not need to have a change in use are Oak Street and Willow Street. So the one in front of you first is the Main Street location. This does need to have the use changed. The Albro House does as well, which is right next to us here.
We actually do have the images, so.
There you go. The Oak Street property does need to have its use changed. And Depot Road does. And Depot Street does. So Oak Street and Willow Street do not, and the remaining 4 do.
So maybe what we should do is just go through each of the slides. So Jamie, maybe you can start at the beginning and we'll just talk about the first image. So this is the Albro House. As folks know, on the bottom of the slide, on the right-hand side is Town Hall, 732. Albro House is right next door. You can see in the description that the parking lot, the majority of the parking lot actually includes the Town Hall parking as part of the Albro House property. And this would be a conversion of that to affordable housing, so it would be a lease type of situation.
And just an existing structure, which is different from the other parcels. The thought here is that this might be a great site to bring into the existing MCI program that's run by the Harwich and Chatham Housing Authority, which has been very successful for Chatham.
And what is the MCI?
It's a program where people can rent the house out for, I believe, a term of 5 years.
5 years.
And while they're living in the house, part of their rent is put into an escrow account. And so when they leave the house, they have a sum of money to put down for a down payment
Okay.
to purchase.
And what about the septic location on this property? Do we know exactly?
Well, we would do a
Sitting on
lease,
it.
so we wouldn't have to, we wouldn't have to change the septic if we do a lease
Oh, we're just
arrangement.
gonna do, no other renovations, okay.
Correct. Well, the building would need to be renovated because it no longer, it has 2 bathrooms in it, but the shower was removed.
But no additional additions, et cetera,
additional
so we wouldn't
renovations.
worry about the septic, okay.
Other than internal.
What's the next one?
Why don't we do the
Yeah.
next one?
I do note that we'd have to restrict the rental of it, so you don't have young children in, because there's extensive lead paint throughout the building.
So all of those kinds of things would come up. There's tons of feasibility studies and tests that need to be done, and I'm sure all of that would come up. But thank you for noting that.
Madam Chair?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we had discussion about this at the trust, because everybody keeps getting ahead of themselves in the discussion. What we're talking about now is turning over the jurisdiction. What happens after that has to be another step that will engage
Yeah, and
the
I'll talk
community
about that
under.
in a moment.
So
Right,
we're just focused now on jurisdictional changes.
okay. Sorry, go ahead.
I'll start.
Yeah,
maybe.
please.
So this is the old recreation building at the beginning of Sisson Road. Right now, Harwich Junior Theater actually rents out the building there that's identified as 265. In the rental of that originally, there was contemplated to be affordable housing located on the site already. So in that triangular piece in the southern section along Sisson Road would be where we would attempt to get additional housing units in. And ironically, in the lease with the Harwich Junior Theater, they knew that that was the town's intent, that something would be constructed there, and they did put in a plug that if starving artists wanted to have a house, could be restricted to that. I don't believe we can be that restrictive in it, but they did put in the plug to see if they would be able to accomplish that.
I don't have a lot to say without the town planner being present on these parcels, so I kind of defer to you, Chris. You have the history.
Well,
Do you want to move to the next one?
Go ahead, Don.
you do want to know the history. The Sisson Road piece was actually put out to bid before, preceding the lease for the Junior Theater, And that was precisely the use. There were other things that went wrong there, but there were going to be units, multi-family units in the back, and it was laid out for that. The town has already approved it once.
The
It
next,
was actually done as a bundle
Mhm.
with the West Harwich School and was Hedge.
Yep, that's how I know.
That put together the project, and between the two sites, they came up to a level of density that made the project go. And
A little matter of toluene happened.
a little matter of some an underground plume through the West Harwich site was discovered, and they backed out.
Which, so everybody knows, because that's another simmering subject here, that precluded the use of this for residency because of the background levels of the dry cleaning chemicals, but it didn't preclude it being used on an occasional basis, like for meetings or whatever. But so where we were at is you can't convert that building or anything on that property because there is a plume. That's
This is
not
a great-
this.
On the Sisson Road property, of course, it's
Good
within
number.
walking distance of a lot of amenities, so it's a really great site that includes some smart growth principles. And actually, I think all of the parcels meet at least one of the smart growth principles that are outlined in your housing production plan.
the parcel that's up is 70 Willow Street, 1.8 acres. This was already town-owned property under the control of the Board of Selectmen for purposes of affordable housing. In this 1.acre parcel, at last year's town meeting, I think it was last year's town meeting, there were 2 encroachments on this parcel, which create some issues for the ownership. So there was authorization to correct those boundary lines. We have not successfully done those negotiations yet, but the idea would be to convert that 1.8 acres into affordable housing. Willow Street is fairly close to 28 in West Harwich, Route 28 in West Harwich.
Next one.
Next.
Just a quick question, there, on different piece of property. Where's Route 28?
I don't think it's on that, it's to
It's-
the north of the site.
It's a block and a half north.
Okay,
That runs on the other side of the junior theater.
That's the back side of 97 West Main,
And it's parallel to 28.
okay.
parallel to 20.
So the Habitat.
The Habitat project
up
is due
there.
north,
Okay.
exactly right. The next parcel is the Depot Road site. This is the one that the board had asked for, and the revisions were made, that, when you look at this parcels, we took out J4 and J6. J3, J2, and J1 are still in there. You can see in the middle of J3 that there are 2 vernal pools, and any affordable housing project, really any project, can't bulldoze in vernal pools, so any design would have to be done around the vernal pools. So this was that site on Depot Road that the board approved, with the exception of J4 and J6. And I believe that is a environmentally sensitive area. That's the light blue in the diagram. So we would be somewhat prohibited from construction of anything in that light blue area.
And I would just add that it's important to include J3 in the wastewater calculations so that maximum number of bedrooms could be clustered at the north side. But as Chris said, we wouldn't be able to bypass any state law, so development would certainly be restricted to the northern portion of J3 and including J1 and J2.
This next site is on Depot Street. So the last one was towards East Harwich. This is in far west Harwich. Actually, the cemetery and the church are in that intersection from Depot and Main. This is a small parcel, most likely probably a duplex at the most would be able to fit on this site. But it is a site that would be for having scattered sites throughout the community. This, I think, lends itself to that, and most likely a small duplex would be viable in this spot. But again, the feasibility studies need to be done. There are some wetlands on this site as well. '70 Willow, I talked about that already.
That's it.
I
Oak
think we
Street.
did have one other site on Oak Street, which we did meet with the folks from the golf committee at the last trust meeting. And on the Oak Street site, which I guess we don't have a diagram of that, there's 2 parcels, just under 3 acres, a lot of wetlands, but there is the possibility of doing some housing right along Oak Street. And these parcels are adjacent to the golf course, were originally designated for affordable housing purposes, and just for location, just to the north of the existing driveway going into Cranberry Valley.
So what, these
Yes.
were, you said were designated?
They were designated already for affordable housing purposes. That's what the research showed, so.
There was an attempt. And I was chair of the housing committee at the time, and it was a crushing defeat.
Which is why we had the golf committee come in.
Yeah, we had the golf committee come in. The golf committee had wanted to use the property for an expansion of the course. When they found out that there's so much wetlands there, it's really not practical for them to expand in that area, so we possibly could put some housing right on Oak,
Are the wetlands in the center of the lot?
in the center of the lot, towards the property on the golf course.
But the time that those parcels were in front of town meeting, they voted not to.
Yeah, Charlene thought she found in the deed records that they had been in fact voted, so we'll double check.
Okay.
But
you should.
notwithstanding that, that's why we had golf come in, because as I recall the conversation at the meeting you're talking about, it centered around a conflict between the interests of the golf people versus that. We wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page, and they left the room on the same page.
So all of these parcels are being vetted for housing development. We have applied for a technical assistance grant with Mass Housing Partnership to assist us in everything that comes after town meeting. So that would include prioritizing which parcels to move forward with first. Certainly the town doesn't have the capacity to develop all parcels at once, so there'll be some prioritization based on whether it has a likelihood to impact housing needs, and whether it's a good site for development, of course. So there'll be, once the prioritization has been done, we'll be able to engage in some feasibility studies. There's a whole slew of pre-development work that needs to be done anytime you're considering a parcel. You can imagine all of the engineering and site-specific tests. I have a whole list that's 3 pages long if you're interested in learning the details, but there is considerable investment that goes into the parcels, which is why the transfer to the trust needs to happen before any of that other work can happen. Once we have an idea of what the sites can handle and which sites to move forward with first, there will be a community input process. This is a really key piece of the process to ensure that the community has ample opportunity to provide their insight on what the best use of the parcel is, and to make sure that the community's needs are taken into consideration and that the town is responding to them when the town develops an RFP. So there's the 2 pieces of feedback that need to be attained. There's the feasibility work, and then there's the community input work. And those 2 sets of information will be brought back to MHP to assist the trust with writing a request for proposals that we will then send out for developers to bid on. And once we get 1 million bids back from lots of high-quality developers that might give us beautiful designs, we'll select one and move forward. And by we, I mean the town. And that's the process. So the next step right now before a town meeting is the trust wants to make sure that the community really understands this article and is trying to be as transparent as possible. So there is a Harwich Housing Forum taking place on April 30th at 6 p.m. in this room, where we'll be reviewing Harwich's housing needs, talking about some data. We've also developed beautiful handouts with some facts about housing that will be distributed to make sure that everyone leaves understanding what the town needs. We'll get into a deeper description of the parcels, we'll have more time, and then we'll explain the process of what happens after town meeting, as I just explained to you.
Any questions?
None, thank you.
Okay.
John?
I was there.
Oh, right.
I was gonna say, we are looking for, I know this is a little bit different part of the agenda, but a support vote. So if
Right.
the board wanted to support this article,
I would move that we support the article.
Thank you, Don. I'll second it.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
No.
All in favor of, do you want to have a formal?
Right.
Yeah. All in
Aye.
favor?
Yeah.
Aye.
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 unanimous,
Opposed?
I'll abstain.
Okay.
301.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll go back to
Thank
our
you.
current.
Thank you for your
form.
indulgence too,
Yeah.
in terms of young child.
It'd be cruel and unusual punishment to make her sit here.
That's what I thought.
So now we'll move on to, did you have something? Public hearings and presentations. Monomoy Regional School District, budget, number one, budget/reductions. Hi, Scott. Katie.
We're back. I guess,
Better than ever.
yeah, I think before we get started, I just want to point out, maybe just, what for some, at least from, I guess maybe our school committee's perspective, the obvious, but I think some people who might watch from outside might not be aware of this in terms of the schools, but I think we had two big challenges this year when it came to our budget and our budget as it impacts Harwich. First, there was some new out-of-district expenses that these are expensive, intensive need placements for special education that we can't avoid, that caused our budget for this fiscal year to go up by $432,000 in that one category. We also saw again, another thing that we can't avoid, which is how the state calculates minimum required contribution in the Chapter 70 formula, which shifted $671,000 towards Harwich, which impacted the Harwich assessment. So there was $1.1 million in challenges that we saw going into this budget season, particularly for Harwich. And the schools have really focused on what can we do to go and try to bring this budget into something that is manageable for the town. And at the end of the day, the assessment underlying this budget goes up for Harwich 4.04%. It's actually a negative assessment in Chatham, but that's just because how the minimum required contribution broke for Chatham. But underlying this, the budget for the school district, it's a 2.6% increase in the budget. And I think relative to, the town's budget and town department budgets, I think that comes in as a pretty reasonable place. We had shot for, bringing our budget in at 325, but knew that at 325, we were going to have a challenge when it came to the assessment for Harwich. So we were trying to do, things that would be creative to push that down. And Katie can kind of talk to you. We heard, there was a want to go and reduce the budget even further to kind of let you know how we got to where we are now. So Katie can kind of talk about a couple or three places where we did go in and trim the budget.
Before I get started on that, I wanted to just show everybody that regional school budgets can be complicated, and I think it's important for everybody to know the level of information that is on our website when it comes to our budget. If you go to monomoy.edu and go on the finance page, you'll find the assessment information. Pay no attention to that person up on the right-hand side. Assessment information, our audits, bids, budget information. Under the Understanding the Budget, there's a group called Support Mass Regional School Districts, and they've put together some really good short videos that talk about how regional schools are funded, about the foundation enrollment minimum contribution, how regional school district money is spent. So I think it's important that people, if they have some questions, if you can go in, it's a nice light reading right there on the website. And we try to keep it as current as can be. This PowerPoint presentation that was a part of your packet is already uploaded in that area as well. So if we could go to the very last slide in this, just zoom all the way to the end if you would, please. I just wanted to show you that in the, there were 3 areas that we looked at to, and then we'll go back. It's kind of like when we come and you only want to see the assessment at the end, so we're coming to the end of this. Up, go up one more, please. Nope, sorry, keep going, sorry, I'm so sorry. If you just keep going to the end. There you are, up, right there. So what, we looked through the budget to see where, how we could reduce the budget, and what we're here to present to you is a budget that's been reduced by $150,000. The basis of that, we have an early childhood grant that we were, thought that the FY19 was the last year of the grant, and we received notification in March that in 2020 will be the last year of that grant. And that grant offsets a early childhood education teacher salary by $20,000. So we were able to take that offset. We're going to go back up and look at some slides earlier in the presentation, but when we went through and calculated all of the transportation numbers with the new agreement that we've entered into with Cape Cod Collaborative, we had a savings of $80,000 in our transportation. So we took that right off of the, out of the budget. And then in this current year, the district, we were approved to create a stabilization account, and we funded it in FY19 with $50,000. That's all that that stabilization account has in it at this time is $50,000. So that we weren't touching programs, we, the school committee and the finance subcommittee of the school committee made the decision to not fund the stabilization account in FY20 only, not permanently not funded. So that was the basis of the $150,000 reduction without having to impact programs. So now we can, so I highlighted in the PowerPoint the 3 areas in your budget that we impacted, because as you know, the district, we vote our budget by the cost centers, the 1,000s, the 2,000s, so that's, we're indicating where those reductions were made in the FY20 voted budget by the school committee. So we can go back up and start all over again. Thank you.
So I think, Jamie, could we just jump to slide 9? Rather than go through the whole budget presentation, go through sort of a couple new slides. I think one of the things that that was on your list that you wanted to see was just administrative staffing. So what we did is we put together on slide 9 a comparative look at how Monomoy is administered relative to some other school situations on the Cape. If you look at, I think specifically, Selectman McCaskill had asked about administrative staffing at the high school relative to other high schools. So there are 2 functions when it comes to high school principals and assistant principals and department heads. You have supervision of the students that are in your building, but you also have the evaluations that have to happen, and they're very specifically laid out by the state what has to happen in terms of teacher evaluations. So so different school districts do it a little bit differently. You'll have every building will have a principal. You'll have assistant principals in buildings, or sometimes they're called deans or housemasters. You'll have, in some cases, you'll have directors that might be like an English language arts director or coordinator for the building or for the district. In other cases, you'll have teachers that are released a fraction of their job. Maybe they're released from teaching one or 2 classes to go and evaluate teachers within their subject area. So this looks at just the staffing loads of administrators in different high schools on the Cape, and looks at how many students are in the building, how many administrators are in there, and what you see is that Monomoy falls right in there in that kind of median level. There's 178 students per administrator that we have in the building. And this looks at we have a principal, we have 2 assistant principals, and we have an athletic director that's shared part-time with the high school and part-time with the middle school. Again, you know, so when you see directors and each one of these high schools has some sort of athletic director that's shared. Sandwich, on the slide up there, I've tweaked it since I think I emailed it to Sandy, but the number up there for the Sandwich enrollment is their 9 through 12 enrollment. They have a STEM academy at Sandwich that the high school principal also oversees that. That's why it's a fractional principal staffing on that. But again, from a high school standpoint, we fall right in the median on the schools. And I also wanted to point out from a central office standpoint, you know, most school districts, you know, will have a superintendent and assistant superintendent. You know, we're one of the few that have, I mean, we're a small school district. You know, we have a superintendent, we don't have an assistant superintendent, whereas a school district like Mashpee, which is relatively the same size, actually has another layer of administration, you know, within their school district. The other slide from that we wanted to kind of just jump in and get, Jamie, if you just jump down to 13.
Scott, if I may, before you leave that other
Sure.
slide, is there some reason that the staffing slide is for the high school and not the elementary and middle school?
Why focus on the high school?
Is it, yeah,
It's only because at least the conversations that we had at the table, Selectman Caskell was focused on the high school staffing. At the elementary level, Chatham Elementary just has a principal. There's no other administrator in the building. Harwich Elementary School is actually as big as the high school in terms of its enrollment. Knock on wood, elementary kids tend to not have as many behavioral challenges that the high school students have at times, so you'll.
we'll go with that.
Yeah, but we actually, when we first opened Montmorency Regional High School, we only had a principal and an assistant principal, and we had we had a principal, an assistant principal, and a coordinator of curriculum at the elementary level. And we decided to move that FTE up to the high school. It didn't make a lot of sense that we had 3 administrators at Harwich Elementary School and only 2 at the high school. So, you know, so we didn't add staffing at the administrative level. We actually moved the staffing up to where it made more sense for the mission that we have, which is, you know, evaluating the teachers, but also making sure we've got proper student supervision.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, and in the middle school, it's a principal and assistant principal, and they're charged with all the kids and all the evaluation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, I had explicitly followed up on Michael's request that I had asked for a 5-year average of both FTE and budget dollars for administration overhead, allowing it to be all across the entire district, precisely because it was difficult to tell whether you were sliding an FTE here or sharing them there. I don't know that I feel like I've gotten the answer.
Don't feel like you've gotten the answer?
Not to that question.
So after we were here last, the next day I sent the person, you know, central office staffing that went back.
All overhead
Oh,
staffing,
okay.
all, not
Okay,
to capture that whole
Right.
picture, rather than just like a snapshot of the high school and a snapshot of the central office. All administration overhead over 5 years, both as to FTE and as to budget dollars.
so I did that for administration. We
Yeah.
can do that.
That was
We can
just
do that.
parsed out as a niche for the central
Right.
office, but not for
Right.
all administrative costs.
But the FTE hasn't changed, and as Dr. Carpenter mentioned, it just shifted from Harwich Elementary up to the high school. What would be happy to show you that transition.
I don't need it broken out by area, just in the aggregate,
Yep.
administrative overhead over 5 years, both as to FTE staffing and as to dollars.
So you have the
Central
central office and superintendent's office all we can get you the principals and assistant principals.
I'd rather have it as
Yep.
one whole picture.
Thank you.
The other thing that, if, Jamie, if we could jump to, that's the slide, sorry. So the other question was just bus transportation, the big question on, when we, we went out to bid twice, had no bidders. We ultimately went to negotiate with Cape Cod Collaborative on busing. With Cape Cod Collaborative, we had a 10% placeholder for transportation in our FY20 budget. We had, last time we went out to bid for transportation, year one was a 13% increase, so we were hoping that we could, with a competitive bid, that we'd be able to come in at 10%. When we had no bidders, we were a little worried. Through our discussions with Cape Cod Collaborative, we were able to see our transportation budget come in $80,000 or $79,404 less in FY20 than what we had put in that 10% placeholder. I think I gave to Chris just all of the back numbers behind this, but on slide 15, you have, we have broken down, just what the cost will be, for all the different types of buses that we run when we were calculating transportation. But behind each of those numbers, I know that one of the selectmen had asked, about, maintenance costs and gas and this, that, and the other. So you've got that, but all of those, this is an all-in number that has maintenance, transportation, or maintenance, gas, personnel, everything for Cape Cod Collaborative. And the nice thing is, if we look out into the future years, over the next 5 years, it's a 6.36% increase in transportation for FY20. It drops below 3% in FY21, and it drops below 1.25% in the next, for the next 3 years.
And Scott, if I, excuse me, go ahead,
Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And where in this slide presentation am I seeing the cost for acquisition of buses? Because Destinations already had rolling stock.
It's
This was the material that we passed out at the beginning of the meeting.
No, I get that. It's just, but
it's not.
this is just pure operations to operations. From the prior vendor to the collaborative, unless I'm missing the intent of this, because my concern, because I was the one who asked that, my concern was, you gotta buy the buses,
It's
you gotta
in
park
this
the
number.
buses, you gotta
It's in
repair the
this
buses.
That's an all-in number.
It's all in.
Not the buying of the buses.
It's all in.
Yes.
Everything's in that.
So this is paying the debt on the buses, basically?
This is all in.
For the full 12.68 over the
This
course.
is-
Yep.
That, not
Okay.
that.
That's the detail.
Right, so
Yep.
that's the detail behind the numbers here. So,
Because I just got it.
We just
got
It was
this.
just distributed at the beginning.
But while they're looking at that, can I ask you a question about maintenance and operations? Are those fixed costs from the Cape Cod Collaborative? I was told one time that they charge you as needed rather than a fixed charge.
no, it's,
So they'll stick with
So
that charge.
Right, so just so, if you could tie the information that we gave to you, so you, on this first page, so if you look on in the middle of the page, you're gonna see, it says EOY, balance of loan, okay?
Yep.
So follow that number down to the very bottom where it says subtotal $925,234 under 2020 on that first page. Well, if you go to the top of, on page 15, slide 15, there is the regular day transportation FY20, the cost of $925,234. And that's made up of the fuel, the maintenance, the wages, the benefits, the vehicles, the insurance, the overhead administration. So that's the all-in number that then is summarized on the PowerPoint in front of you.
And to my question, those are fixed in. They aren't as, they don't charge as a, maintenance persons, they'll charge as maintenance costs come up.
The only thing that may vary will be the fuel charges.
Right.
Which that would happen.
Right, okay, but everything else is fixed.
And if things come in less than on the spreadsheet, we get credited back.
So just to be clear, these numbers do factor in the maintenance, the gas, everything?
all in.
All in.
Everything,
Okay.
okay. And then you have a regular 180 days, 14 buses.
Right.
So are these seasonal positions? Do they don't work in the summer, or
So
how's that gonna work?
These will likely be the same bus drivers that the kids have now. I know that there has been an effort by Cape Cod Collaborative, and Katie and I have had 2 meetings with the drivers to invite them to apply. And I loved one of the drivers was like, she's like, it's taking me 3 years to go and get the kids exactly how I want them on the bus. It's like, I hope I have the same route next year. I'm like, that's what we hope too. So ideally, we'll see, most of those drivers stick with us. And they had questions that they were asking the collaborative in terms of, hey, we do the summer camps that the school district runs through MCLP. Will I be able to do those? And the answer is, yeah, we still have to run those same buses. So, so you have the pre-K summer bus trips are in there, and those drivers would be doing that.
And we do have summer programs too that run in the schools, Title I and pre-K special ed programs, so.
So, and I don't know if you can answer this question because it's not Cape Destinations in front of us as well, but, in terms of those employees getting seasonal employment, and then if they want to take on the summer part, what is that? Is it a comparable wage? I mean, or are they losing money?
I don't know.
I don't know.
So you can't really speak to that,
And
is what I
and
figured.
The wage
but-
and benefits, we can't speak to, because they will be our employees.
Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The other thing's not readily apparent, so I'm just going to ask. I see what you're doing, and basically the acquisition is through a lease, but that's an asset. So the question I have is, whose asset is it, and whose asset is it after the lease is timed out?
Do you want to answer that?
Well, the Cape Cod Collaborative, it will be the ones that's financing, and so that it becomes,
They're the owner-operator, or just the operator?
well,
We, as Monomoy Regional School District, are part of the collaborative.
Right.
I would say that any superintendent on Cape Cod would go and say that we are the collaborative.
Right.
So the buses as they age out are our buses. We've paid for them. We'd had conversations, with them on when it's time to sell our aging buses, and whatever residual value is on those buses to apply it towards new buses if we were looking way out there in the future on when these buses were to be past their serviceable
And what's
runs.
that amortization?
the buses will be on the Collaborative's balance sheet, not on our balance sheet.
What's the amortization of it? 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, 8 years?
I think it's 7.
I think 7. I
7.
believe that it's a 7. And I think the way, at least we spent a significant amount of time meeting with Paul Funk, who is the business manager for Mashpee, Harwich resident, and he's been on the building committee with us for the Monomoy Regional School District high school project. And Paul is a big fan of what the collaborative has been able to do in terms of stabilizing Mashpee's transportation budget. So, so they've been there long enough that they're, sort of on the, sort of like the car payment, so to speak, is now gone. But as we all know, your car payment may go away, but your maintenance costs start to go up, and you have to do that way. When do your maintenance costs start getting to be more than the new car payment? So he was saying that the usable life is probably about 10 years, so you have 3 years where the costs ideally start going down even below what they are on, on this projection. But you hit that place where you're gonna see a few buses that need more maintenance, and you say, okay, it's time to go and retire those and purchase new ones.
So that's what the overall schedule would be as you get to that point. So you've got maybe, say, just for an example, three buses that need to go. So now you're gonna just look to your budget to put those buses back in.
Right, and to, in this, in this all-in number, it's not just 14 buses, because there's backup, there's spare buses that we would have, so that kids can do field trips, and we've got our buses for field trips and, for sporting, for sports teams to get to competitions. That's all in this, and it's in the order of buses.
But the one thing that's not in this, if I remember correctly, is you're gonna have to use an admin in terms of the scheduling, the
Right.
bus routes
So
and
if
such.
you look at the last line up on the slide, which is 15, page 15 in your packets, you'll notice that there's $30,937 that we're carrying for the transportation coordinator, which is half of a administrative assistant salary in central office that is going to become that administrative, that transportation coordinator. That number would have been carried, so Cape Destinations would have carried that person in the cost that they would have had in the regular transportation. So since we're absorbing transportation in-house because we are the collaborative, this is if we didn't pick this person up on our end, then we'd be paying for somebody in Osterville to go be the transportation coordinator, which doesn't make a lot of sense because they don't know the roads and the road conditions as well as somebody in our towns.
So does that create a reduction in administrative budget on the other side?
So so in the FY20 budget, we reduced our central office administrative assistant staffing by a half-time
Okay.
and picked it up. So this person's still a 1-0 person, but half of their job is going to be dealing with parent phone calls on transportation and working with dispatch on routes. But it's getting funded out of the transportation budget, not out of the administrative budget.
So that's in the FTE numbers we saw. Okay, thank you. Do
So
you wanna move-
that's all the
Okay.
new slides and new information. So I'm welcome to take any other questions you might have.
Any questions?
Yeah, well, it's not so much of a question, Madam Chair, thank you. Now that you're here, I just want to make sure that the public that's seeing this, because there was some conversation outside of this room about staff reductions. Now, as I recall, the last time you were here, the enrollment's slightly down, and you were planning on making that kind of an enrollment adjustment anyway. I just, for the record, want to make sure that the public knows that we didn't drive the staff down.
No, it's, I think it's a budget that's sensitive to, needs of the two towns. It's also a budget that's sensitive to the reality that, it's not that we're seeing families flee from the district. We're actually seeing quite the opposite. More families are staying with us. We're seeing more families wanting to come to Monomoy because of the quality of our schools. We've got the highest ranked middle school on Cape Cod, but but the reality is there's just fewer and fewer school-age children in our two towns. And, Chatham has been going through a faster decline of elementary enrollment than Harwich, but next year, we'll see at Harwich Elementary School, we'll be shutting one kindergarten section and one first grade section as we go into the next year. So we're actually going to see, one fewer kindergarten, one fewer first grade, and if we go think a year out, we're going to see one fewer second grade, year out, fewer third grade. And it's just mirroring what's happening in our two towns in terms of number of school-aged children, which sort of, gets into bigger, bigger questions and conversations on how do we keep families here in our two towns.
Well, thanks. I just wanted to make sure that narrative got out there because there was some sort of subtext in the community that because we had had discussions about the budget that somehow we were forcing you to lay off teachers as a consequence of that.
And I also, there's a 8.5 FT reduction. There's only a 3.2 teacher reduction. So and it's a net teacher reduction. So we're seeing a few more folks at the sort of lower grade levels reduced because we're seeing a bubble of kids at the middle school and high school. So we're going to be pushing supports next year towards the middle school where that building's going to see an increase in enrollment, and then we'll see that increase in enrollment heading towards the high school. So we're going to have to push resources to follow that bubble of kids towards the high school over the next couple of years.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Larry.
A couple comments. I did look at your website a few days ago on this. It's a very good website, very informative. You could compare the budgets, your February 28th budget, I think, and recent ones. That was good. Yeah, I've been the one that been really pushing on the budget. I certainly want to thank you for working with us and lowering the budget figures so we can address our needs a little better. So I appreciate that from you, and I see school board members here as well from the school committee.
And I just want to point out, a lot of it, I think credit also goes to Chris. I think Chris and I work well together. I think we are in constant communication back and
My
forth.
congratulations to Chris too. But he's on this side of the table, so
Did you have questions there? So, I'd like to thank both sides for working hard at this as well. It's a difficult conversation, it's a difficult subject. I also think, to reiterate for people at home, to understand that the 432,000 in special needs is something that's out of the district's control, that you will be getting monies back, but it's a year-long process, and then going forward, it's the same. It'll be sort of a waiting game. I think, to your point when you first opened up, it's really hard to understand all the funding mechanisms, that go into play. And I've had many questions from various residents, and I know just from MMA and sitting through different discussions, it's absolutely impossible unless you're well-versed in describing it. So we appreciate it and hope you understand where we're coming from as well as we try to make things as affordable as we can for the residents in town while supporting the wonderful district that's growing. So, we do appreciate all the hard work.
And
Thank
watch those videos. I think they're helpful. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just while they're here, do
Sorry,
we want
yeah.
to vote? The
Oh.
board has, you have as one of your articles for support or not. I mean, do you want
Yeah,
to vote
we
the
got it.
school budget while you're, and what
I'd rather
number are
digest
you?
it with Michael here.
we probably should wait till Michael comes
Yeah,
back.
well, that's true. We don't have Michael, so he probably would like to vote on that as well.
Okay,
Okay.
We'll connect tomorrow on the numbers.
What
Thank
was,
you.
We don't need
was
you
the-
back though.
Increase?
4.04.
In assessment, a 4.04% increase in assessment, a 2.6% increase in budget.
Okay.
And again, it's, the reason there's a significant delta between the 2.6% increase in budget and the 4.04, it's that minimum required contribution swing, which I know from a town, it's a tough pill to swallow, but there's a silver lining there. It's an indication that there's more school-age kids. That's why, so Harwich ended up seeing more school-age children this year. Chatham saw less school-age children, so Chatham's minimum required contribution went down, yours went up. So it's one of those double-edged swords.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, so we'll go down to new business, request to increase the Recreation Department spending cap for the current fiscal year. Hi, Eric.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. So, I'm Eric Beebe, Recreation Director. I'm here tonight to request an increase in our spending cap for our revolving funds for the rest of this fiscal year, from 125 to 175. We're currently at or just over the spending cap. We actually see this as a good problem. We've created more programs this year. We've had more registrations this year than we anticipated. So it's not just an overspending, but an over-earning as well. So everything we bring in, everything we spend, we also bring in for. So we're looking to go to 175. I did send out a copy of basically every program we have all year long, adult and youth. Money in, money out. You'll notice some can be in the negative, some could be in the positive. Revolving fund is such an important tool for recreation especially, because it's flexible in that we could look at a season. And we have programs like Open Gym, where it's a free program. We have thousands of kids that come in every year. And the other programs that make money could supplement paying for that. So that, that's a big part of the revolving fund for us. So that's what we're looking for, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on it.
Thank you, Eric. Questions from the board? Larry?
This helps me out because when we had our budget meeting,
Yep.
you presented revenues, and I was concerned that there wasn't an expense side
Oh,
of
yeah,
that.
yeah, yep. Yeah, this is,
So
yeah.
this helps answer that
Yep.
question. How do you handle expenses that come to you from, DPW, things of that kind?
DPW expenses,
Are they rolled into this as well or not?
they're not rolled into this. They have their own budget for field maintenance and
Yeah.
things like that. So there's no expenses coming right out. We do have little projects here and there. If, for instance, we need to repair a fence at a baseball field.
Yeah.
We do use our revolving fund for that sometimes, because we also run programs on that same field that bring in money for the revolving fund.
And so that's a separate question, really. that we-
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
respond
it's
to.
been kind of the policy, at least in the time I've been here, that recreation has never been a cost center to capture all their costs. I think Eric
Yeah.
has done an outstanding job to do the direct costs, so the programs he has covers the direct costs of his people. But we haven't been able to really touch the surface on DPW and those other support
Right.
elements.
I realize that because I've been pushing the other way for every year I've been a selectman. And
But
so
we have progressed.
This is, yeah, I agree, this is better. I was still moved to, so we fully understand all the costs going in. Not in a detailed way, because it keeps coming back that I'm trying to get every dollar, I'm not. Directionally, though, I think it's still important when we make decisions and what the total cost is, what the source of revenues are to run the programs. But this is a good, I'm not giving up on it, we still need that information. This is a good start, and I appreciate that, discounting some of the programs that were covered by the town that we
Yep.
need to. The individual programs, you've worked it out.
Yep.
I'll just keep hammering on the other stuff.
Just, Madam Chair, I'd like to have Carol kind of come up because town meeting actually voted the spending limit,
Yeah.
and now there's a request to go above the spending limit, and just what action is formally needed by the board.
Hi, Carol.
About a month ago, I had prepared a document for the Board of Selectmen. It was on February 28th that was sent to you. And it just talked a little about revolving funds and the rules around revolving funds and general laws and so forth. So the board can increase the spending limit during the fiscal year if it's deemed necessary. And in addition to that, this does go to town meeting every year. Went to town meeting, it increased $5,000 last year.
Yep.
To $125,000 was requested. I did notice this year that it was very close, and so I had contacted the recreation director, and we had a discussion about this, and so that's why he's here today, to present this to you.
And what number, if we're gonna increase the
Well,
cap?
yeah,
What's the recommendation to go?
We're looking permanently at town meeting to go to 175. I'm also looking to go to 175 for the rest of this year. It's gone up leaps and bounds because we do have a ton more programs, and believe it or not, a big one is pickleball. We've had 200 plus people playing pickleball. So the money coming in is higher and the money going out is higher. So the, you know, the more people, the more you spend, the more you make.
Right,
It's
that's
been a
good.
big part of it.
So I think the board would have to officially vote to increase the spending limit up to the 175,000 for the remainder of FY 19.
19, yep.
Okay, I move we increase the cap from 125 to 175 for the remainder of this fiscal year
Second.
for the rec department revolving program.
Moved and seconded, Dawn?
As long as Larry had his pet peeve. Mine all along, and just so you don't feel I was picking on you folks.
No, no, not at all.
Mine all along was the magnitude of where we're at over the last 15 years in revolving funds. We've gone from like small thousands to over $1 million, you know, government-wide. It's just a lot of money. To me, that's a black box. We've committed that we're going to do quarterly reviews, but the magnitude was just one element of it. What's going on inside that box was always a problem because I couldn't tell. I'm not sure there was a mechanism set up to tell what you would have known in a regular operating budget, which is line item spending. And I mean, I'm going to go along with this now, but as we go forward, as Larry has his thing going for cost centers and profit centers, but mine is what's going on inside the account. My goal is going to be every month rather than every quarter, but let's see how it works out for the quarters. I get that you've got sustaining revenue that's coming in that would allow you to do the expenditures. So
Yep.
I'm fine with it for this year.
Chris?
I mean, just to the point, I mean, Eric's done an outstanding job kind of listing off. I mean, is this kind of the report
This is
you're
exactly
looking
what I would want from everybody, so thank you.
for? Thank you, Eric.
All right, so we've
So
got,
I just,
oh,
can
sorry,
I
Carol,
just-
yep.
We do have a process where we review expenditures on a regular basis. In addition to that, we have budget controls in place so that over expenditures, which they were not in the past here, so they cannot happen anymore. If nothing else, if you're, you know, so busy in the budget season that, you know, then you get notification that, you know, your budget is it's going to cause your budget to be overexpended, then, you know, it sets an alarm off, which sets a process up. And so I don't want you to think that there's nothing in as far as the finance department is concerned in that review process. In addition to that, I wanted to let you know that you go through an annual audit, and those funds are audited on an annual basis. So they're subject to review, they're subject to the selection of invoices, selection of receipts, and the tracing of those transactions to make sure that they were authorized and that they're appropriate for the particular purpose of the revolving fund.
Thank you, Carol.
And I was not implying that nobody was watching anything. What I am saying is in real time prior to the expenditure, we had no real system to determine, within a broad category, there could have been a temp employee, could have been uniforms. Is the appropriateness I'm not questioning. What it is and how we plan on that in a given year, because the "we" in that conversation didn't include us, we. I mean, we don't know what's going out. So with that, I'm still prepared to support the increase for this year.
Okay, so it's moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in, Ed?
So this is the whole series of expenditures and receipts that are carried entirely through the revolving fund, separate and apart from the annual budget.
Yeah, yeah, it's all
approved at town
separate,
meeting.
yep.
This is approved in that article late in town meeting where we set the spending caps. But in the local receipts section of our revenues that we take in and we do appropriate during town meeting from the recreation and youth revenue, the bulk of your revenue comes in from parking and beach stickers.
Oh, yeah, yep.
But you do have two categories, summer program fees and program fees. What distinguishes those programs from the
Yep.
the revolving?
The summer program fees, the only one that goes into general fund right now is swimming lessons.
Okay.
That was switched years ago. All of our summer programs were built into the budget. The town administrator at that time switched everything into revolving fund except for swim lessons.
Okay.
So that's the one that still goes into general fund fees. And then adult program fees, we have a couple adult programs that are still within the general fund as well. Our volleyball program, not our volleyball, yeah, I believe it's just the volleyball program right now.
Okay.
It's still in the general fund.
One of the benefits of having the programs in the administered out of the revolving fund is if you get more signups and you
Yep.
need more instructors, you can then purchase it.
Sure.
But what happens if you get more people wanting swim lessons? Do we say, sorry, we can't?
Well, we haven't run into that problem yet.
Okay.
But we do have, we budget for 3 swim instructors as well as a waterfront director. And they're in charge of all the swim lessons.
Okay.
That's part of the seasonal budget. That's why that money comes back into the general fund. So it's been pretty consistent as far as our numbers for swim lessons, so.
Okay, that's good.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
So, moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Thank you.
Great,
Thank you, Eric.
thanks.
Thank you, Carol.
And we'll go to contracts, Saquotucket Marina Snack Shack contract.
So, Madam Chair, I'm going to get started. I did take a stab at doing a cover sheet.
saw that, thank you.
So hopefully this gets a little bit more to the flavor.
I think it looked good.
But is that what people are kind of?
That's what we're looking for.
So just at the town meeting, Article 35 of 2018 annual town meeting authorized for the snack shack lease of up to 10 years. Currently by law, you can only do 3 years, so this gave us the authority to do it. The harbor master, working in close coordination with administration, oversaw the final completion of the project, and it just finished up really in earnest this past fall. And the request for proposal, which this board has reviewed and approved, was then advertised consistent with law. We had actually quite a bit of interest, but ultimately we ended up with only one vendor that came in, and we had the RFP out. One vendor did submit. The harbor master completed the memo, which outlined kind of the review process. It was an RFP, so we went for quality first and then price second. The good news is he met on both measures, the quality and the dollars. It's Dockside Seafood LLC has deemed to be a reasonable and responsive bidder, and we have successfully negotiated a land lease between him and myself and John, the harbor master. So, and the overall bid amounts were above the threshold for the first 5 years was $18,000. The lease was prepared by KP Law, reviewed by KP Law as negotiated, and I fully recommend the award of the lease to Dockside Seafood Shack LLC for the minimum annual payment of $24,000 for the first 5 years and an option for an additional 5 years consistent with their proposal. And I would ask for the selectmen to authorize the administrator to sign that lease. That was the way we had sent it out. And just part of the reason for the timeliness on this is it does have a requirement that he needs to obtain a seasonal beer and wine license. So as soon as the board executes, I'll sign, and then we'll get an application in for the beer and wine. So he will hopefully be ready to go at the, I think it's May 31st is the target date for Memorial Day.
Questions from the board? Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hate doing this because everything is so perfect as to form now. But as to substance, I've got several concerns. Did we do a pre-bid conference or anything? Because I know a couple of local people who weren't even aware that the bid was out. And when you get one bid or no bids, you tend to start worrying about, okay, why?
Yeah, I'm not as concerned with that. We had probably 3 or 4 people come in directly to have conversations. We did proactively send out the RFP to people as to the reasons why people did not put in. I know in one case, I had a potential bidder had spoken with me quite a while ago. They had some operational concerns where before they had an interest because of their operational concerns, they weren't able to bid. I don't know, John probably got as many inquiries or more than I did, so I don't know if he can speak to
Madam Chair, members of the board, John Rendon, Harbor Master. Yes, sir, I talked to several people. I sent, you know, I had numerous tours of the facility to show them the snack shack. I sent them, once the RFP was approved by you, I sent it out directly to a handful of people. I have a list here if you'd like to read it, but we published it on our website. We sent it both to Cape Cod Times and Cape Cod Chronicle. We only really were required to do one, and we put them out in both for 2 consecutive weeks. So, I mean, I did reach out to a number of people, and, you know, I think we were pretty proactive at it.
Well, the reason I asked is because it's first time out for the facility, and it might have been something you would have wanted to do, to have a pre-bid conference to air out any concerns anybody might have had with the first bid.
I think it
As you recall, I questioned the ability for somebody to maintain, because there's always waste in food products. And I thought that the bid proposal with the menu requirements was going to inexorably lead to a higher percentage of wastage, which I don't know whether that caused anything or not. But could I ask one more operational? Because this all of a sudden occurred to me. I'm outside of the perimeter of the building, the envelope of the building. It's our property. There is no sit-down anything there. I mean, so one would question whether you're getting a pouring license or a package license, but a package license, you can't drink anything on premise, and a pouring license, we would take liability over anybody wandering off.
No, actually, a good point. We did have a discussion. The nice thing about having a deck area with the rails that we have designated, was in the materials, to show an area where the picnic tables could go. He did ask for a little grass area, so he would have to put up some fencing or some kind of temporary structure just to designate. But he was made aware in the discussions, and he does have a liquor license in other
Newport.
in other locations. So he's familiar, and we did walk through that. But we did pick an area that he could have as designated, so he could have his, I can't remember the name he gave it, but the area control manager, to be able to walk through that area and police that up.
I'm just concerned because we're carrying a liability, ultimately.
Actually, ultimately, we always carry liability, but he would, as part of this, have to provide liquor liability directly, so he would be the first party of responsibility. Anytime a town's involved, the deepest pockets is where people are gonna sue, but.
Well, I say that because I went on his site in Newport. It's bounded by docks, so more so than ours is. I don't know, I mean, maybe, I hate to consider myself puritanical at this point in my life, but have cars, there's no sidewalks, so to have cars come in or boats come in and we're serving alcohol at the site, the only way they're gonna go out is the way they came in.
I mean, ultimately,
And we're requiring it, oddly enough.
the facilities on town-owned property, so, you know, we have the lease, we have the tenant's insurance. As Chris has mentioned, we're always gonna have some liability, it's on our property, so I don't really know that you can police it any better than that. Any other questions?
Just to be
That
clear.
was gonna be my concern. I'll just press John on this. Is how comfortable are you with that we are controlling the liquor serving area?
Well, a couple things. We didn't require it. It was not a minimum requirement for the RFP to have beer and wine, just for one thing. It was not a requirement on the town's part. If I could just say, Mr. Griffiths is here in the audience. He's the one who put the bid in. Joe Griffiths, he has a home in Harwich, longtime permitter, slip permit holder in Saquatucket. So he's been in the area a long time, and I just want to make sure you guys knew he was here. Regarding how comfortable I am, I mean, you know, I think there needs to be clear signage. In the site plan that I put in the packet, I kind of walked the site. Chris and I had several discussions about how to contain it. I think because of the deck space area, the new boardwalk area that we have, I think it's something that can be enforced. I know Mr. Griffiths plans to have dedicated staff that does nothing but manage the area, the deck area, both tables where food will be served, cleanup, monitoring where alcohol is being consumed. And so there'll be signage at the stairs at every point within that orange lined area that I included in the site area. So it's not going to be a huge area, but can people, you know, safely and have a beer and a fish sandwich? I think so, and I'm not that concerned about it.
Thank you, John.
Sure.
Did you have another question, Larry?
A question possibly for you, the walk-in cooler. That's such a nice looking building there now. How will you disguise that so it still looks nice?
I'm sorry.
You have to go up to the podium.
I can answer that for him, and if I'm not
Okay.
answering it properly, Joe can get up. But we do have a fenced-in area behind the building. It was part of the plan, and it's a fenced-in area that, in that site plan, Mr. Griffiths has asked, and he would pay for it, to just move that one side of the fencing that's on the east side of the enclosure a little bit further to the east to make room for this 8x10 walk-in freezer. So it will be behind that enclosed high barricade fence. So will people see it walking up the ramp? Probably they'll see the top of it, but again, it's not going to be out in the open or anything of that nature.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Don?
Just one more question. Not that it's comparing anything to anything because it's the only bid, but in your evaluation, management and adequacy of staff got highly advantageous. Now, like I said, I went on to the internet, and I do know that you have a pretty highly successful operation going in Newport, in Rhode Island. Where do you feel that you're going to anchor yourself, there or here?
I'm sorry, where do I feel?
You have to go up to the podium
Yeah.
to respond.
Yeah.
And if you just identify yourself.
He's asked Mr. Griffiths where you will be. Are you going to spend most of your time here managing the restaurant? You can come on up here.
My restaurant in Newport, which I've had for 35 years, my brother-in-law, who's worked for me for 25 of those, is now general manager. And my past practice has been to go down 1 or 2 days during the week in the summertime. And basically, I pick up the checkbook. I'm a CPA. I do the books for the restaurant. And I anticipate this year that I'll only go down 1 day a week during the week. Actually, I go down to, before the place opens, we meet, and I make all the decisions on the menus and pricing and all of that stuff. But the day-to-day operation is my brother-in-law. So I have spent most of the summer here anyway. I've had a boat down there for 5, 6 years. And I will be here at least 46, 50 hours at that business.
Thank you.
At least initially while I'm building it, you know.
Do you have any other questions, Don?
Nope.
Ed?
I just want to correct one thing. I've reduced the size of that outdoor walk-in to 8x8 from 8x10 because it's. I met today with Fraser Trash, and it's been determined because of the recycling, et cetera, that I have to have two-yard dumpsters, one for cardboard, one for paper trash, and 2 tote bins for the recyclables. So I need to squeeze a little more room in there.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Well,
Can we-
yeah, I move we move ahead with the lease to Dockside Seafield Shack LLC for the seasonal beer and wine licenses for the Snack Shack on Saugatucket Harbor.
To approve the lease.
To approve the lease.
This isn't an application for the liquor yet.
I'm sorry,
It's not an
to approve the
application for
lease.
liquor yet.
I'm reading the wrong sentence. To approve the lease.
And if you'll include authorizing the town administrator to sign on our behalf. I'll second.
Include that in my motion.
Thank you.
So Ed seconded. So moved and seconded. Any further
No.
discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
You're an
I may be
Oh,
proven wrong.
you're opposed?
Yes,
Oh,
and I may be proven wrong, but I just have too many concerns right now, so we'll see how it shakes out.
okay. So did you say aye?
3-1.
3-1, so good luck with it.
I'd just like to reassure the board that for 10 years, I operated an Irish pub in Medway, Mass, without violation. And I've operated in Newport without violation. I think you can trust me that I will contain, and there's no bar, it's beer and wine with food. I don't think you have to worry about it.
Thank you. Ed?
Well, and as a fellow person who ran a pub also for 8 years without violation, I take you at your word. It's not hard to do as long as you stay on top of it, and I'm sure you will from your past history in Newport and elsewhere. I know we do beer and wine at our annual Cranberry Festival, and if anything had a possibility for potentially getting out of hand, that does, but we've been able to manage that quite well for the last 7 years now going on. So I wish you the best of luck and look forward to stopping by.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing you all on Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you very much. Okay, sewer pump follow-up under old business.
So I'm going to invite Dan to come up. Per the board, we did have Dave Young from CDM did provide some additional information to Dan in terms of contacts, so Dan was diligent about following up. We did send that out this morning as supplemental material, so I'd like to have him go through what his findings were, and then I would like to have a additional opportunity to comment.
And Dan, I have to throw a compliment your way. I was contacted by one of the citizens in town who said what a great help you were to them with some sewer questions. So again, we thank you for all your hard work with that and outreach.
You're welcome. So I don't know if you guys have had the opportunity to comb through the memo. I can I'll read through it, and I guess we can go over any additional questions you might have afterwards. So over the past week, I had the opportunity to speak with wastewater collection system operators from 8 different communities on and off Cape. The purpose of these discussions was to gather information about the different pump station designs in each community, what difficulties they may or may not have with their pump stations, what maintenance and operational duties they perform on the pump stations, and how frequently operators are getting called out during off hours, for which type of station, and any other things that Harwich may want to consider as we move forward with sewer in the community. Most of the operators I spoke with worked in collection systems that had multiple different types of pump stations. I really focused on the 2 that we were debating here, which is the suction lift and the submersible. The overall opinion that I did get from all of the operators was that relative to the submersible stations were that they were good. Each department had varying methods of how they maintain their systems, weekly maintenance that they do, annual, quarterly. Each one of them had a very kind of different regimen that they went through. Additionally, a number of the different towns also had supplemental equipment in their pump stations, from aerators, which kind of keep everything moving inside the wet well, mixers, which is exactly what it sounds like, and then things called Muffin Monsters. So Muffin Monsters, it's a brand, and they are basically a grinder. So as the wastewater dumps into the wet well, it passes through this grinder, and it chews everything up to make it more easily passable through the pumps. A lot of the communities had preferences towards specific pump manufacturers as well. So for comparative purposes, I was really sticking to general submersible versus suction lift, because there's many different pump manufacturers, from Flight, ABI. I mean, is a bunch of them. So instead of getting into submersible and then 5 different types of pumps that may be in them, was trying to focus on really the overall pump station. I think I mentioned out of the 8 operators, 3 of them, actually I got another call late Friday, so I did speak to 4 operators who had worked on suction lift and submersible, and then 5 who had only worked on submersible. So for the operators that I spoke with who had worked on suction lift stations, I asked them additional questions just to kind of see what their thoughts were comparing the 2 stations. So for the ones that did have suction lift, I did of course ask, you know, if you were building a collection system from scratch today, which pumps would you use? And they did relay that they would prefer to build the collection system with suction lift. I asked them what the pros and cons of suction lift stations are. So the pros, as we discussed last week, it is a cleaner environment for the operators to work on. Pumps and valves, everything being above ground makes for a quicker repair. You don't need a hoisting license and a crane truck if you're doing work on the pumps. The motor and pumps can be repaired and replaced independently of each other. You can audibly and visually inspect the pumps and motors. The motors can be replaced with basically any off-the-shelf electric motor. You don't need a specialty or to send out. If you have a supplier that can get you an electric motor, it can be put into a suction lift pump. The electric and mechanical equipment not submerged in wastewater. The pumps can be easily modified by changing belts and shims to increase or decrease pumping capacity. Some of the cons with suction lift, because the motors are above ground, they are louder than a submersible. That's less impactful if they're in a building, but if they're in a small fiberglass structure or something outside, it is going to be somewhat louder than a submersible pump. The suction check valves can get stuck open, which an operator would have to clear. The operator that I spoke to that brought that up said that can also happen with a suction lift or a submersible. The operators are cleaning the scum layer and skimming off the rags more frequently with the suction lifts than they are with the submersibles. And because the pumps and motors are above ground, they are temperature sensitive. So if the pump gets called to run and it doesn't prime right away, it can shut off due to temperature, in which case the second pump will kick on and go to prime. The last question I asked about the suction lift station specifically was, is there a difference in quantity and after-hours call-outs for suction lift or submersible? And 2 of the 3 operators did indicate that they do have more frequent call-outs for the submersibles than the suction lift. Again, there are more submersibles out there than there are suction lift, and I did bring that up, and one of the operators was kind enough to send me their call log and did say even at scale, they are less likely to have a call out for a suction lift station. And then as far as general questions for both types of stations, I asked what the general and operational maintenance are that they perform on their submersible stations. You know, a lot of this stuff is daily routine, whether it's submersible or suction lift. You have to go to every station every day. With some of the submersible ones, one of the communities is going out weekly. They take about 2/3 of their day every Wednesday, and they go out and jet the wet wells, agitate everything, and they rarely have to pull the pumps. Other communities just go out and visually inspect them. They bring a pumper truck in 3 to 4 times a year and vacuum out the wet wells. This isn't an uncommon practice for suction lift either. One community kind of takes it a little bit more technical tact. They're measuring and taking amp readings on the leads that go down to the pumps. So they're using that, and if the amps, they check them every week. If they're starting to climb up, they know that the pumps are starting to rag up and they're gonna have to pull them. So they're using that as a method to, you know, move with their maintenance instead of waiting until something happens. I did ask specifically, you know, what problems they have with submersible stations. You know, responses to that one varied greatly. You know, like I said a minute ago, a lot of people are doing a lot of different general maintenance, operational maintenance. So some of them varied from, you know, when you're pulling a wet well, or pulling a pump from the wet well, I think Dave and Mike explained last week, they come up on rails and go back down on rails. Operators have had those rails come dislodged, and at that point, you have to stop flow to the pump station, bring in a pumper truck, pump it out, get someone down, replace the rail system, or fix the rail system to get it back in service. Ensuring that the submersible pumps set back down properly in the wet well, you're doing it blind. You know, they ride the rail system down, and then the discharge on the pump meets up with an elbow at the bottom. And, you know, you really don't know if it's connected until you turn things on, and if it's not, you gotta pull it back up and set it back down. Two operators said don't run a submersible on a VFD. VFD is a variable frequency drive. It allows electric motors to ramp up slowly from 0 to 100%. They said when you're doing that, they're more likely to rag up and clog up. The operators have expressed some long lead times when they send a pump out to get repaired. You know, I don't want to make it all sound too bad, because a lot of them, you know, were perfectly fine with their submersible stations. You know, these are just some of the things that can happen. You know, other than that, again, it's kind of just the overall cleanliness of dealing with pumps and motors that are submerged in wastewater. It's kind of the overall piece as well, so.
Thank you, Dan. Any questions, Chris?
Well, I just wanted to, you know, I had a conversation with Dan, and, you know, as the administrator, I've negotiated in other locations for putting sewer pump stations in people's front yard. And, you know, there has to be a real consideration to what the operator recommends, and I think in this case, you know, he's made a good job of indicating that the suction lift may be slightly better and have more advantageous. But by the same token, sorry, by the same token, we have to look at what footprint is this going to be in the neighborhood. And it's interesting, just two points really that I'd like to kind of drive home. When I was in my office the next day talking about this issue, I had a lady from one of the locations overhear the conversation. And she came in and she goes, "You're not going to put those plastic structures with the loud, you know, stations near my house, because I have to look at that every single day." And when I had initially started to talk to people about having these locations, I said, you know, we would make it like an outbuilding, a fairly small building that, you know, by having the pump submersible, they would be quieter, they would not be as obtrusive in the neighborhood. And I think most of the folks that I talked to were kind of on board with that. I think a substantial change in having these structures outside, there's two options. Either we do a larger footprint and put a bigger building and put the material in there, because the suction lift is above ground, has to have more space, or we have them outside. So it's a smaller footprint, but it is louder and much more unsightly. In kind of a compromise, and plus I don't want to slow the project down, quite a bit of work has already gone into doing the submersibles. And some of the locations, the suction lift can't do something that's more than 25 feet down. So in some cases, they're not even viable, if you would, for the project. So I am aware of one location where it may make some sense to put it in the suction lift and give that a try in one location that hopefully won't slow down the project too much. So, you know, I have taken into account what he said, and I think, you know, some of the slides that we saw at last week's presentation, that there were several that had multiple types of systems, and we will have some different types because we have some that are so small that they'll only be underground anyway. But one thing that kind of bothered me, and I don't criticize Dan for this, but you know, he called to the DPW director in my last town. And in my last town, we had a 10 million gallon a day sewer treatment plant, substantially larger. I was the administrator for about 5.5 years in that community. And this isn't good to say, but I'm gonna say it anyway. You know, as an administrator, it's when you don't get phone calls that you know things are operating well. And in that community, the only time I ever got phone calls was we had a sewer treatment plant that was literally right next to a mini mall. So on certain weather conditions, we always got called about the plant itself. But I asked Dan, I said, well, call and talk to the DPW director and see, you know, were there any concerns with these submersibles? And he couldn't recall any. And I can't recall being called out for an operating one that was an issue. So, you know, from my standpoint, being an administrator in several other communities where we had sewer pump stations, you know, that tells me that it is a proven technology. There's more vendors, there's more viability, I think, to doing that. But I think where the Chatham example has been very successful with the suction lift, that I think if we could take one of the larger stations and make it suction lift to try that, it probably would be worthwhile, because we will be moving forward as we go.
Don?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make it clear what my part was in asking some of these questions, and it breaks down to just two simple ones. When somebody's sitting in front of us and saying that it's too late to do this, we've been talking about this for a year, there's a matter of timeliness to it. So we kind of shot ourselves in the foot with that. If this discussion had happened 8 months ago, then that would have been a better thought. But more importantly, with all respect to the town administrator, I look to the people who are going to operate it. And I would no sooner want to design it at this table or through your office. I thought that's why we hired a wastewater guy to the department. At some point or another, this becomes just like the fire department or the police department, where I'm not going to tell the fire chief what trucks to get or how his building is built, because I'm going to defer to the operational thought from the person who's going to use it. And I would like to see us a whole heck of a lot more collaborative as we go along, because this is only the beginning of the whole process. And I could think of 300 million reasons for why we'd want it to be collaborative. We have made it clear, we build it, they're going to have it delivered to them to operate, at which point we will no longer be involved with it. So if this happens, and it's probably going to happen again, we need more time and we need more input by the actual people who are going to operate it, so that we don't wind up with something unseemly like this, where we have a discussion about, well, you can't bring this up right now because we only have 3 weeks left. And that, I think that's a fair point.
Yeah, Madam Chair, just to that, you know, one thing that didn't come out, you know, maybe last week as much as it should, you know, as you heard the superintendent, you know, I have a good working relationship with, you know, as many people as I can in this organization. And we had very lively, very active discussions to talk about the pros and cons. But as Dan is the operator, Dan also doesn't have any experience being an administrator that has negotiated to put pump stations in people's front yard. And for me to not take into serious account, CDM is a very reputable company. CDM has a tremendous amount of experience. And to not take that into account as the way they had presented, you know, I think would be quite honestly negligent on my part to not take into account their expertise. So I have heard Dan. I'm actually very familiar with the folks from Weston and Sampson. They were my operator in some respects in my last community, so I am familiar with their work as well. And it was a weighted decision over several months that we had those discussions, and it boiled down to the factors that I kind of identified.
Dan?
I think too, and you know, Chris and I have talked at length about this over the last couple of weeks, and you know, we both respect and understand the decisions and how they got to where we are right now. And as Chris was just mentioning, you know, exploring putting a suction lift station into phase 2. You know, what that's going to allow us to do, and really, like I said, when I talked to all these operators, they really were fine with their submersible stations. And like I said, the ones who had suction lift preferred those. But the ones who had never had it, they were perfectly fine with their submersibles. I think for the town of Harwich to at least put in one of each in phase 2, we're probably going to have, 8 phases, 7 construction phases, 7, up to 50 of these pump stations throughout the community over the next 40 years. I think this is a good opportunity for us to explore both options and then really take what works best for us for phase 3 and moving forward. If I think it makes sense to me to do that. Like you said, both operators have been satisfied with both different types for multiple different reasons. I think that it's a smart way to move forward.
Thank you, Dan. Any other questions?
In terms of the size that we're discussing, how much larger is the enclosure of a suction pump versus a submersible pump?
Depends on what pump station you're talking about. If we could,
We're talking 10% larger, 50% larger?
Yeah, actually, when
100%?
the neighbor came in, I'm trying to do this off the top of my head, I think it was about 13 by 18 for what we have put in now, what we have recommended,
And that's a submersible pump?
the submersible, and it's I think, like 20 by 26. I
So-
mean, it's,
So it's double, basically?
yeah, and one of the things, we kept some of these sites away from people's property so we wouldn't have to take easements. And, we ran into 50-foot buffer issues. We've really squeaked these in so we can try to have them be as unobtrusive as possible. And having to do a larger footprint, I think that there is a location that was one of the bigger ones that I think probably would suit itself to the suction lift. And we can certainly do that without getting too much of a neighborhood pushback.
I like that recommendation because I take the discussion one or the other, but I actually do share Chris's view that we have to be careful what it looks like in the neighborhood,
and
if it's workable.
I understand that as well. I mean, Chris and I have, like I said, talked at length about this, and, I think I mentioned at the last meeting, it hasn't been that I didn't feel like I was heard, and I understand how and why the decision was made. I mean, I get it. In terms of size, unless I know how big the pumps are, how much flow it is, what we can squeeze in a building, or you put it outside, I mean, that's...
I do take down that we should vet this in the future, vet these sooner on, so we don't have this discussion towards the end. But, I'm comfortable with it.
Just a quick question. My name's Sandy, Harwich resident, master electrician in New Jersey, journeyman in Massachusetts. What are the decibels are we talking about? We said the above ground one is more, but how much more? What kind of decibels are we talking about? And then are there any hybrids that could be, dry, but maybe below grade a bit, or, could they be dug down a bit for height? And then one other comment, just as being in the trades, anytime you put a pump in water, especially sewage, you're asking for troubles. And anytime you add electronics like VFDs, you're asking for trouble. And typically VFDs are better suited for variable speed motors. So I imagine these are pretty much one speed. So efficiency is not a big part of the discussion, I don't think, for VFDs.
Dan?
Yeah, so as far as volume goes, if they're in a building, the buildings that are being proposed are concrete precast. So from someone standing outside the building, I don't believe it would be something you would notice. I can certainly do some more research and see if it's something you can hear from outside. The noise concern was more relative to if you're doing the suction lift outside of a building in the fiberglass enclosure. So if we're gonna, go this route and put one in a building, I don't believe there's gonna be a noise impact.
So the suction lift outside of the building
the suction lift pump inside of the building you would not hear. The one that was outside the building in a fiberglass enclosure, you may hear the hum of a motor. As far as decibels, I'd have to ask.
That's,
Yeah, I don't have the number off the top of my head. I can.
What kind of height is the structure can they be?
So the ones that, depending on how big the station is, they have some that are as small as something that looks like an electrical transformer for an underground subdivision. Some that look, maybe 10 by 10 by 10. So it depends on what size station we're talking, how much flow it needs to put out. So until we narrow a site, that we want to explore this option in, it's difficult to say what size pumps and how big of an enclosure they would need.
Ed?
What sort of enclosure do you need for a submersible?
Well, they're in the wet well, so it's just a precast lid on,
So there's
at grade.
nothing above grade?
And then there would be the building that houses the generator and electronics, things like that.
How big is that? How big is the building?
The building?
Yeah.
I
That
think
was what I referred to earlier,
You gave me those figures, I forget already.
12
I
by,
think it's like 10 by 13 or something in that range
For a submersible,
for the submersible,
and 20 by 26 for,
for the suction lift, to have the suction lift inside of the building.
So significantly
so it's
larger.
substantially bigger, and I mean, if that's in front of your house, you're
Oh, yeah.
not gonna love it. I mean, let's face it. So,
probably not gonna love
all
the
of
10 by 12 either.
All of these
No, but
locations
I think-
are in residential areas.
You know.
right, and it's a total, is it 6 or 7 pump stations? I forget.
7.
Seven locations in total, 4 that would require a building.
And then there's we have one that, if I remember Mike Judici saying that wasn't gonna have a generator,
Correct.
but I think.
2.
Oh, there's 2?
2 that won't.
Okay.
We will put on there, some of Dan's
No.
suggestions really have been adopted, so, it has been a great discussion, so we will put on pigtail, the ability to hook a generator up quickly, so we will ask for that. The other thing that we probably will look at, we already did water at each of the stations, that was already designed in. I think these grinders to kind of grind things up, we probably should consider doing that proactively too. So some of those suggestions we definitely will do to try to make it operate more efficiently.
Dan, how many, will we be using VFD?
Yeah, but so with a VFD, you can ramp it up as fast or as slow as you want. I can make it go from 0 to 100% in a half a second or 1 minute. So it's all in how you program it, which is you do run on the keypad of the VFD. So, it's good to have the ability to ramp a motor. If you go from 0 to 100% like that, you can create what's called water hammer in your system, and that has a tendency to negatively impact pipes. They make them break, things like that. So to at least give it some sort of a softer start is good, but what the people that I've talked to is a long ramp-up time, like 1 or 2 minutes to get up to speed, is something that we don't want to do.
And just going back to the 2 that we won't have a generator, I mean, I know that you can bring a generator
Yeah.
to it, but it occurred to me after we were talking about those that, in a scenario where it's just like a power outage that's minor, that you can get the generator over there, or whatever happens to that, you can get it over there. But what about those couple of areas, if there's a storm or something and you can't get there? What happens?
So there is a couple different things. So if we know a big storm's coming, we're likely going to stage a generator at the site so
Okay.
that we're not, trying to plow out an area and then get it set up. One of the things that all these sites have too is we're going to have radio communication to all the sites, and if the power goes down, they have battery backup systems, especially the 2 that
Okay.
don't have generators. So if we lose power on a site, we're going to get an alarm that's going to dispatch an employee to go out and, check it, deploy a generator, do whatever needs to be done.
Okay.
If there's a situation where there's total and utter failure, you get on the phone with the pumper truck and you run pumper trucks until you can get it back up online.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Just in my experience, out in Sturbridge, we had a storm where our neighborhood didn't have power for a full week, and there were 40 of these little E1 stations that were there. They just came through. One of the neighbors had their, when power goes out, if it's almost full, you're in trouble. If it's not almost full, you can have some buying time. And they just sent a truck down, and they literally just cleared them all, just to make sure that people
That
would start
nobody
off
had an
with.
issue.
But we were without power for a full week.
Okay.
So that was one of the approaches they
Okay,
took.
just wondering what the plan was for that,
Yeah.
so there's any further questions on this?
I do have, not directly in this case to you, Dan, but more to Chris. In terms of the schedule, you know, I think the schedule we had showed us having 100% design the end of January. And obviously, we're behind that, and I'm assuming that the delay has been partly because of the pump question, getting the easements and this type thing. Let me finish, though.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
You're shaking your head, that may be incorrect. But my point is, it sounds like what you're recommending now is that we take each pump location on a case-by-case basis, whether it's submersible or suction. Does that further delay getting to 100% design, or is there a limiting factor in this discussion prevents us from getting to that point so we can move the project ahead?
Yeah, no, just in terms of where we are, the design was finished in terms of in January. It had to be submitted to the regulators for approval. So we are still waiting for the regulators to approve. When I say regulators, Conservation has approved it here. The Zoning Board of Appeals that needs to do a work on a couple sites, Mike Judici had mentioned that. The DEP needs to sign off and give their blessing to it. We do need to do the order of taking, which the order of taking is ready to go on these station sites. And then the last is the appraisal. We need to have the appraisal number for the order of taking. So there's probably 2 or 3 things that we're still waiting for.
What's your
before we're
best
ready to
guess
go out
in
to
on
bid.
timing now then?
Yeah, I mean,
to
they
get to 100?
talked about being out to bid, having the bid documents out for March or April. So we're still in that time window, but we're losing obviously March.
Right.
So it looks like we'll be out in April.
So does this pump discussion influence that timing?
Yeah, actually, good question, sorry about that. What my intent is to look at the 7 locations. Some of them are just too small, so you wouldn't do suction lift anyway. So there's 4 that have buildings, and I would have CDM look at 1 location, make sure it meets the criteria. I know there's 2 on Church Street that are probably more than 25 feet deep.
So be clear then.
Those are not gonna be able to be eligible.
Yeah.
But we would take one of the other locations and have them prepare either a new easement document or do it as a change order for the vendor to come in and put in the suction lift station. But I was gonna do 1 location out of the 4.
Okay. So that, to be clear then, we aren't set on one or the other at this point. We can move what you 2 are recommending and get started. That's my,
But yeah, the
that's
idea is
that's
to
why I
keep
want,
moving.
Yeah.
that's why I want to conclude from
The
this.
idea is to keep moving.
That makes, what makes sense from your point, Dan, and the size point, and we're not locked into one or the other, so.
Right, and like Chris said, I mean, by the time the project gets out to bid, they've already talked about staggering contract 1 and contract 2 by a few weeks. So, that buys a little bit more time, and if it went out to bid as a submersible station and we wanted to convert it, we could get a credit for the submersible and then a change order for the suction lift. So we don't have to hold anything up. That could all be done simultaneously.
And, sorry, go ahead, Ed.
And it's possible by the time you actually go out to bid, you will have made the decision on what the location may be of the one that you'd be converting and could put that information out.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be too difficult of a decision. Like Chris said, there's 4 that are really an option. I think we go with, if it's less than 25 feet and eliminate anything that's over, and then we look at what will have the least impact in the neighborhood and drill it down that way.
And then you'll take, as you move forward, like you said, by, phase 3, you'll have a better idea of what you're liking and disliking and.
Right, and we'll have, data to back it up, which ones are causing more problems.
Right.
every community's different. You don't know until you turn the system on what we're gonna have headaches with, so.
Well, thank you, Dan, for putting all this information together. We appreciate it. And again, you know, it was important to get your input. We value it, so we
Thank you.
appreciate it. Thank you.
So do we have to take action on this tonight, or no, just move ahead?
No, we're just
I think
moving
as
ahead,
long as
right?
there's a consensus that, you know, just that's the plan going
Okay.
forward.
Okay.
Under old business B, DHY agreement revised language, vote to approve.
I'll throw it to you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you. This is something that I fought pretty hard for, so I'm
Very politely, though.
very politely. But I'm hoping we agree to it, because the divide was the original legislation didn't allow us the opportunity to have any kind of change. We were thinking it was going to upset the apple cart, and it was going to not allow us to facilitate a quick vote at the legislature. By January 1st, it timed out, so it had to start over again in Ways and Means. So the legislation, if we wanted to do anything, now's the time. So legislative delegation came in. We had a discussion. They didn't think this was a deal killer. We talked through David Young to bond counsel about what we would need, and this would be the language. Personally, this was my initial objection when it first came in front of us, is that I was seeing the public here, but they were essentially voting to surrender their right to have any input later on in the process. The proposed language here calls for a 3-town joint meeting of the boards of selectmen, and that there'd have to be a quorum of at least 2 selectmen from each community, so that we'd wind up having the ability to have everybody represented. There'd have to be a total of 8 selectmen, so that you actually have to have more than 2 per town to be able to effectuate a vote of any sort. But each year, the budget would be presented to the elected representatives of the towns, so that they would have an opportunity to say yes or no. And there was substantial discussion about whether that was creating a duplicative management structure. This is just about the budget. The people who manage the plant would be managing the plant. But there would still be public oversight through their selectmen as to the budget that was going to be out there. No one could filibuster this, because merely not acting on the budget would result in the budget being approved after a period of time. But it would have to come back for a positive vote as a revised budget if the joint boards voted it down. Sounds kind of complicated, but it all boils down to there's some place at the table for the taxpayers to be able to have an input and an influence on a year-to-year basis. It was pointed out that a large component of this is the borrowing, to build the plant. That is what it is. So in a given year, you're going to start with knowing what the borrowing was and what the interest was, and we are absolutely all in as each town. We're being obligated to pay that. So that's not up for grabs. But the operating portion of it will have some oversight from the towns with the proposed budget from the commissioners of the sewage. And I think it's a wise idea. It's the best we're going to get. We got a couple of things that we were tweaking for the other towns to assure them that we weren't going to interfere with operations in it. But this was, what, 6 months' worth of discussion back and forth? And I strongly urge that we support this.
Madam Chair, just, initially I kind of thought that this may be a little bit of a additional step, maybe a little bit cumbersome. But when you do partnerships with 2 other towns, you have to pay attention to your partners. And this is very important. It does add a higher level of transparency, a higher level of vote that would be needed. And this was very important to the town of Dennis. And if we want to keep them as our partners in this, I don't think it's unreasonable to compromise on this. So I do agree that I think Dawn's recommendation makes sense for the board to give active consideration to.
Thank you, Chris. Larry?
And Don made a good case. This exact, as Chris has implied, the exact same interest will go to all 3 towns, statement with all 3 towns, so we all agreed to it. There's other changes in the original document. We moved the deadline up for budget submittal to November 1st to give us adequate time to look at the budget going forward. So I think the fear of having independent agency is there, but we've done everything we can to make it transparent, to have the town look at it and take a vote on it, as Don mentioned. So and we'll get into, Carol's going to present some data, we'll get into the savings, but I'm with Don on this. We haven't agreed on all these discussions, but we need to very much like to move ahead on this, because our next step of moving forward is to get the spatial legislation through the State House. And we've been told that they won't press forward on this until they get a favorable vote initially from the 3 town boards of selectmen. Now, we need town meeting approval, but our hope by that time, they'll at least have initiated the process. So this vote that Don is pressing for tonight is critical to move the process forward.
Thank you, Larry.
Just in terms of timeline, if the board were to vote in favor of this tonight, I think that they were still contemplating doing a 3-town Board of Selectmen meeting like we have done in the past, have all 3 towns at the meeting at the same time, and then vote this, so that way it can be sent to the legislature to make a change. And just for town meeting, this is not going to be ready for the May town meeting, so it would be either at a special in the fall or the next annual in 2020.
Thank you, Chris. Ed?
Well, hearing all that, I'd like to move.
Well, I think Don maybe had another comment.
Yeah, actually, it's funny, you could stay at the same meeting and hear different things. I thought they wanted us to vote the language as soon as possible so that they could convey that to the legislators, because putting it in our draft agreement doesn't mean a thing unless it's also
We have to
mirrored
all
in the
three.
state legislation.
So we want this vote tonight.
Yeah.
It's beneficial to vote it tonight.
Right.
Yeah.
Ed, go ahead.
Move that we approve
The yellow
proposed-
language.
the yellow language.
It's the additional text.
The additional text to the DHY agreement as presented in our agenda packet tonight.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Thank you.
Budget reductions and the tax impact on revived comprehensive wastewater management plan. Carol?
First, I'd like to continue talking about wastewater. So the first slide here that you'll see is prepared by CDM Smith, and it's a comparison of DHY versus Harwich Go It Alone. So the blue that you see here is the cost estimates for 2022 of both of those scenarios. The blue, again, is Harwich alone, and the kind of orangey brown is if you went with DHY. You can see that the differences, I think you've asked for this comparison, and I think they did a really good job at this. Just being able to show you, if you're kind of a picture person, what that would look like, where you would be spending more money in the beginning stages, and where the reductions would come in towards the 1/3 and 2/3 of ways into the project. That's the first slide that they prepared for you. This is the second one that they have prepared for you as well, and that's cumulative cost, which is a really nice way to see this, because then you can see it over time, whereas the first one didn't show you that total picture over time. So again, the blue is the Harwich Go It Alone program, and the kind of brownish orange is the DHY. And that shows you out to right to the end of the project as well, which is helpful.
Carol, if I may, if you could back up to that slide. I think it's important to note that there is a slight increase with the DHY at almost the beginning, but then from then on, it's extremely favorable.
Right, correct. That's correct. I mean, this is a really good illustration, and I think this is what the board's been asking for.
John?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm at the DHY meetings, and this is kind of still confusing me. I'm channeling Michael here for, even though he's not here. I'm looking at this graph, and it's looking like, the DHY goes higher in 2019, and I'm wondering, how's that possible? Because we're not starting it until 2020.
So, I mean, it's hard for me to see it from here, but, can you go back to the prior screen?
I'm just looking at the overlay.
So, I wish Mr. Smith was here, but, Mr. Young was here, but, I'm not
It's
sure that I
showing
can.
2018, 2019 as being higher.
I do think what they have here in the early spike for DHY is our buy-in.
I was gonna
So
say,
it's
it's the
the buy-in
initial
to the plan.
startup, right?
To Don's point.
No, I'm
it's-
talking about the step graph, the next one.
It's not gonna be in 2019.
Yeah, because it's,
We're already
we have to
there.
go
We're
to the
already
Wayback
there.
Machine in order
I
to do
think
that.
concept-wise, this may shift back 2 or 3 years, but this is the schedule you'll see. But timing-wise, I
It's the
wouldn't.
start, anyway,
I wouldn't
whenever it
adhere
starts.
to the specific
Well,
date.
the reason I brought that up is because I had a great interest, and so did Michael, of seeing this as an overlay to our overall tax burden, and this appears to start 2 years earlier than it
Yeah.
could possibly
Yeah,
start.
I agree.
Free water.
Well, this,
So then we have this really complicated chart here, right? And so this is mine, so.
Carol, hold
Carol.
on 1 second. Ed has a
the
question.
previous two slides had nothing to do, though, with tax rate. It just had to do with amount of expense,
Exactly.
Project cost.
project cost.
Correct.
But you
The
still couldn't-
previous two slides
The previous two slides were project costs only.
Project costs.
That's it.
had nothing to do with tax rate.
No, it did not. And those were estimated project costs, 2022 version.
Yep.
Okay, so this slide is my slide. So I'm comparing this slide and the next slide, I'm comparing the Harwich Go It Alone versus the DHY. The chart is telling you, what is your existing debt? What is your authorized but unissued debt? Meaning, what have you taken to town meeting and to ballot votes that have been authorized? And then what will you be proposing, or are you proposing for this project? And then this looks at the median single-family home, and the green line is the estimated tax impact. This is based on the 22 numbers as well, 2022. The second slide is the DHY slide. You can see that green number has moved down a little bit to like 540 maybe, whereas versus the other one was about 600,000 or $600. So what that means is that's what the average tax impact is going to be. The same information is provided here with the cost for DHY, and again, on the bottom of the screen, I know it's hard to see because there's just so many numbers and words, but that we have the first bars are the existing and authorized but unissued debt, and the second bars, which are kind of orange, are what is being proposed for this project. And in addition to this, your capital plan is also included in these numbers. So town prepares a 6-year capital plan, and some of that plan is supported by debt. So that would be included in all of these numbers as well.
Did you want to ask a
Yeah.
question?
At the bottom, you have a comment that says, tax impact of existing and authorized / unissued tax-supported debt inside and outside of Proposition 2.5. What does it mean, inside and outside?
Okay. So there can be a time where the town may decide to ask for debt exclusion. So a debt exclusion you would be raising that levy limit on a temporary basis until the debt was paid off. If it was inside that Proposition 2.5 level, the town would not be needing to go to the voters and ask for that debt exclusion. So this includes both, whether the town has asked for it previously or not, or includes those debt exclusions.
Okay. And what, on the debt exclusions, essentially where there's borrowing, what assumptions have you made on the cost of those borrowings?
Just for the debt exclusions?
Well, for any of this, I mean, what, are we anticipating 5% interest rates?
Oh, okay, sure, that's a great question. This is based on, I believe I used 4.25% interest rates. I didn't increase them as the years went by. I didn't know, you know, I wasn't knowledgeable as to what the interest rates may be, but that's, I believe, what I used, 4.25%.
Okay. Because I know our first phase project is qualified for a 0
Correct.
interest rate, which is a.
But we're gonna try to do better next year.
Well, maybe a little.
I did not, I also didn't include in these projects some SRF funding at a 0%, which the town has right now.
Yeah. Because.
I assumed, you know, a normal interest rate for that.
Sure. And as I understand it, doing this regional project gives us many scoring points on applying for those, so.
But I just didn't feel comfortable
Yeah,
projecting that.
there's no way of doing it, and there's also, at this point, no way of being able to factor in what the impact of the short-term rental
Right.
tax for the
Right.
Cape Wastewater Trust is going to be.
Right.
I
Chris?
do think it's important to just kind of highlight, though, that here we've done a worst-case scenario. So
Right.
we're doing the 4.25. And, you know, before, 3 years ago, we couldn't say this, but the partnership with Chatham, doing a regional project and doing nitrogen reduction put us first on the list to be 0. So lining up and doing DHY, certainly the past isn't a definitely precursor of the future, but it certainly puts us in a better position to go down the DHY route to obtain that 0%. And those are real dollars. I mean, out of the 25 million, I think it was almost $20 million worth of interest savings that are factored in there, which that is substantial benefit to the residents of the community.
Right.
It's, you know, it's similar to the impact we had of building the high school as a regional. I mean, the state picked up an additional 8% of the cost of the building. So.
Don?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. The question I have is because in the DHY construct, nonetheless, 70% of the cost is the town's cost for putting pipes in the ground and you know, putting collectors in town. And one of the reasons that we asked for this exercise was because DHY leapfrogs some years in the sequence of the plan, so it draws them back closer to us. This captures all the costs of DHY, both our 70% for the town and its borrowings, as well as, you know, setting up the plant?
It does, and it captures the reflection of the time frame, the difference in the time frames for the two projects as well.
And then we could have additional savings like we identified with partnering on the paving when West Harwich and Dennis, and I mean, we have all different pieces that we could benefit from over the course of time that we can't know right now.
No, but that's why I brought this up, because if we sequence that with DOT opening up the road, that means we would have to potentially put pipes down as dry pipes, even before the project starts.
That's correct. Yeah.
But again, at 4.5%, at least we're doing worst-case scenario versus the other benefits we may have over the course of time, so. Go ahead, Carol, sorry. Any other questions?
No, well done.
She did have 2 parts to her presentation. The other one was just the budget
Oh,
adjustments
okay.
too.
Do you wanna?
Right.
I'll kind of start. I did take an effort when the 4% versus the 6% was eliminated. We had, that has creates a budget hole from the administrator's budget of $337,500. I did recommend budgeting free cash to pay for some of the sick and vacation buyback of $50,000. We were able to take into account some of the Monomoy adjustments. So with those Monomoy adjustments, we were able to restore the IT administrator, the network administrator that I thought was kind of high on the board's priority, the 8 hours for the Council on Aging, and then the citizen self-serve. And I know I attended a Finance Committee meeting. This is not identical to the plan that was submitted, but I think it is in the same spirit of the plan of kind of addressing some of those needs to address those 3 areas, in particular, the restore the IT administrator. So the funding reductions that we heard from Monomoy earlier are taken into account in this. What we have done in the past, certainly you have the administrator's budget that would be, this could be considered as a budget amendment number 1, if the board was so inclined. You know, I would strongly recommend that for Finance Committee, who is doing its deliberations this week, that, you know, they have some direction from the board in terms of what their budget looks like. And then obviously to give confidence to town meeting that if the selectmen were to vote a budget, I recognize that there's only 4 here tonight, but maybe a little bit of a nod or a consensus that Finance Committee could look at this. They have 2 meetings this week. So it would be better to have some direction, I would think.
Dana, want to comment?
Do you have a comment, Dana?
Why not?
Sorry.
Thank you, Dana Costa from the Finance Committee. This is much closer to what we had recommended, what we put together, and I don't see any inherent problems with this. You're going to be talking about recommendations later in the agenda. We've just started those, but we've submitted several more since that was printed, and we've got 2 nights of it coming up this week. We should be all done, our recommendations on the ones that we can vote, which is most of them, I would think, by the end of this week. So we're in pretty good shape right at the moment.
Thank you, Dana.
But this is good. I like this.
Okay, great,
Yeah.
thanks. Don?
Actually, I wanted to say thank you.
Yeah,
It's a lot closer to what we originally wanted, so thanks for doing the work.
and I agree. Yeah, I think you're certainly right. We all wanted the IT person in there, so.
And the COA.
And the COA, but the COA was important, but a smaller number value.
Ed?
Do we need a motion then, or a consent?
I mean, I would love to have a motion. I think it just gives a stronger,
Well, I move we accept the proposed budget amendments in tonight's packet.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Well, just a question how does what the school committee's done impact this?
on the, if you look at the last 3 that go on the budget reductions and adjustments, the 36,954,
Okay,
the
all right.
remove stabilization, we knew in advance what their reductions were gonna be, so we incorporated those numbers into this.
About 100.
And there's no doubt that there'll be, I think I've had, like, usually in the time I've been here, 3 or 4 budget amendments before we get to
Right.
town meeting. So I'm sure there'll be other additional tweaks between now and then.
Okay, so moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. And thank you, Chris, for doing all that work. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So warrant articles, review recommendations. We have the Finance Committee recommendations for A.
Yeah, I just, in the packet, Dana and the Finance Committee, I know there's other members of the committee here, so I want to make sure I give due credit for all of them, but Jack Brown as well, that they made recommendations, and I thought the board may want to have that, so we did put that in the packet, just more informational than anything.
Okay. So I'm going to move along then,
Yeah.
all right. Did you have something, Don?
No.
Okay. So budget articles 1 through 37.
Yeah, it should start at 4 through, because 1 through 3 have already been voted, those are the,
Yeah, so well then, and then we had the cemetery rules and regulations, and we already voted that one.
I think there was additional information that you were seeking from Finance Committee, wanted to make a few changes to that.
Oh, right, sorry,
So that was discussed, but I don't
But
think
we
it was
didn't
voted
vote it,
by the
okay.
board.
So, can I get a,
Yeah.
But if you wanted to start at Article 4, which is the operating budget,
all right, so, all
obviously as amended with the most recent budget amendment.
right, let me go back to, the articles. Does someone want to go ahead and
Probably
make
not
the?
going to be able to generate a number on the fly.
So we'll start with 4. I'm trying to find, so we've got the town, so we'll do, you want to do the budgets and go town operating budget, Monomoy Regional School District, like that?
And none of the finance ones have been voted
Yeah,
yet.
so-
we're
or do you
looking
want
at
to
from
just
4
say
to 37.
4 through, does anyone want to make the motions?
Madam Chair, I'll move that we support the currently amended town operating budget,
Okay,
Second.
knowing that it's probably going to amend
again.
Again,
Right.
yeah.
again.
So moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Madam Chair, I move that we support the proposed Monomoy Regional School District budget.
As amended.
Again,
As amended. Second. No, Don said got it.
Dawn seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, 6.
Madam Chair, I move that we support the Cape Cod Regional Technical School District budget
Second.
as proposed.
Seconded by Dawn. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Move that we support Article 7, the Water Department budget as proposed.
Second.
Seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
And Madam Chair, I move that we support the wastewater/sewer budget as proposed.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Capital budget?
Article 9, adopt a capital plan.
Madam Chair, I move that we support adoption of the capital plan as proposed.
Second.
Seconded. Any further discussion? All in
Just-
favor?
just-
Aye. All
Wait,
opposed?
what about the discussion
No.
part?
No, you can't discuss it.
I just wanted
Let's
everybody,
just keep moving, Don.
I just want them to know why. For obvious reasons, the pet burial ground's in the capital plan, so
Okay.
that's why I'm gonna vote the way I'm voting.
Oh, here, okay, so that's your clarification?
Okay. Fair enough.
So
All right.
now you can do the all
Now I
in favor.
can, okay. So there's no more discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
3 to 1.
Lease purchase agreements?
Madam Chair, I move that we support Article 10, approval of the lease purchase agreements.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Administration?
These are the beginning of the capital articles.
Let's see, we have Article 11, capital items funded from free cash. Article 12, facility maintenance and repair fund. Article 13, fund the snow and ice deficit. And Article 14, fund shortfalls in budget transfers for FY19. I move that we support approval of Articles 11 through 14.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Water Department?
Madam Chair, we have Article 15, purchase replace mini excavator for Water Department. Article 16, Pleasant Lake Avenue, replacement of section of water main entering tank. Article 17, replace the T1 main facility generator. And Article 18, purchase a 2019 Ford F-550 truck for the Water Department. I move that we support approval of Articles 15, 16, 17, and 18.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Department of Public Works?
Madam Chair, we have Article 19, purchase and equip vehicles for Department of Public Works. Article 20, reconstruction of Lower County Road. Article 21, purchase of mobile lift system. Article 22, road maintenance program. I move that we support approval of Articles 19 through 22.
Could you split 20 out?
Sure.
Okay.
I move that we support
All but-
passages of Articles 19, 21, and 22.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion on 19, 21, and 22? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Back to,
Madam Chair, I move that we support adoption of Article 20, reconstruction of Lower County Road.
discussion?
This was one, I think we were looking for some further information on priorities of the, of overall road maintenance.
Yeah, you have Lincoln coming in on April 1st.
So I'd rather wait on this one until we go through that discussion.
We'll bring that one back.
Okay.
So, sorry,
For lack of second.
right. Zoning Planning Board.
Madam Chair, I move, move that we approve the following articles. Article 23, single-family dwelling with accessory apartment. Article 24, freestanding portable signs. Article 25, retaining walls for septic systems. Article 26, special provisions for lifting existing structure to new and appropriate elevations. And Article 27, provide funding for an update of the town's local comprehensive plan. I move that we support adoption of Articles 23 through 27.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion?
Yeah, I just have a question, because on the planning board articles, they hold hearings.
Yeah, they've
We-
held their
we-
hearings,
Have we got,
and they had favorable votes on all.
okay,
I just have a question on the special,
The 23rd.
okay.
on the special provisions for lifting existing structure to new and appropriate elevations. So are we imposing then the existing height requirement on those, or are we allowing them to be raised to the flood elevation and go as high as they need to go? That's an issue.
Yeah, zoning's not my strong suit, so I don't know the answer to that, unfortunately.
I would like to hold on that
I'd like
till
to
we
get the
got some
reports,
clarification.
that's what I was
because
I'd
driving
like
at.
to hold that one.
In the
because
past, that's
Which
come
number
up
was
as
that?
That is 26, special provisions for lifting existing
as
structure.
Julie's pointed out in the past, that's come up to be a serious concern from butters who all of a sudden get blocked because they raise the base high.
Well, yeah, but it also is an issue if we're saying that, they have to meet a height requirement that we won't let them go beyond, because then you're gonna have houses with squished flat roofs, so it can be an issue.
Squished and flat.
Squished.
So do
So
we
I
want
think
to
we need
not
to bring
take
it
up
back.
any of these?
I mean, I'm fine with the other ones. I think we should can we bring that one back? We'll bring it back like we're bringing Lower County back.
Yeah, I know the planner, I think, is having some medical issues, so may not be available. I'll try to get
Okay.
the copy of the report.
Okay.
If that would give the board some direction, we'll
Yeah.
get a copy of the report.
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
Could I also mention, because it's our responsibility, under the charter, anything that has to do with a bylaw change or a charter change has to also go to a hearing through the Charter and Bylaw Committee. And that's up to us to do the referral, not up to them to forage for it. So whatever we do decide, can I just make everybody aware that when we do it, that it's up to us to convey it to them so that they can hold their hearings, because they also have the same constraint where they have to advertise in the newspaper.
Madam Chair, I would withdraw my former motion and make the following motion that we approve Articles 23, 24, 25, 27, and recommend that they be adopted.
Thank you. Seconded?
He has changed the motion, so he needs a second.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Abstain. I'm waiting for the report.
Okay. Madam Chair, I'd move that we refer Articles 23 through 27 to the Charter and Bylaw Review Committee.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I totally missed that. That was
He-
just
he-
referred the the
Yeah.
5 articles to the charter and bylaw.
Charter.
Thank you.
Okay. Library, fund library technology.
Madam Chair, I move that we recommend adoption of Article 28, Fund Library Technology.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Golf.
Madam Chair, I move that we recommend adoption of Article 29, landscape reclamation at Cranberry Valley Golf Course, Article 30, bunker renovation at Cranberry Valley Golf Course.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Cemetery Department.
Madam Chair, I move that we adopt Article 31, amendments to cemetery rules and regulations.
And refer that to the charter,
Well, no, these aren't,
the
these
regulations.
these are rules and these are,
They're in the bylaws.
are they?
No, these are rules and regulations that I
Of-
believe
of the
need to go to
Cemetery
town meeting
Commission.
for adoption. But they are officially rules and regulations, but they require town meeting
Town
action.
meeting action. Dana?
I just don't know if you still had a question from us on what we're doing, but we're basically accepting, adopting it. We have a motion that makes some changes, and it takes away the 3 items that they added that were new items. It takes away the
Christmas.
Center Street Cemetery, along with rule number 5 that also has to do with Center Street, Harwich Center Cemetery, and it changes the address. So that's basically our amendment. We're also referring it back to the committee because we found several other problems with the rules that we think need to be fixed at a future town meeting, and it would just be too much to try and fix them all in one shot, now that all the rules are published.
Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are you changing Christmas to holiday decorations, or?
We're just taking that out completely, because that would be an amendment to brand-new language. We're asking them to go back and review all of those kind of things and get it right the first time instead of putting forward something like that.
But ours has that language in it.
I know.
Well, because it's already printed, and so we can, they're
We'll just have to
suggesting they
revise
change it.
Yeah.
They're suggesting they change it by motion, and then come back.
We would be voting to
Okay,
We'd be saying, oh, we'd be
approve
supporting that.
language that isn't going to be there.
Madam Chair, I'll change my motion. I move that we take no action as we are waiting further information.
Okay, thanks.
Second.
Let me suggest that, Dana, can your committee forward us your recommendations in writing so we can include those in our motion?
They're gonna have their conversation, right?
Yeah, we're going to have a motion in writing, yeah.
Right,
Okay.
yeah, well, after you have your meetings this week. Is it?
I don't really care about what they just want to have trash blowing around in the cemeteries.
Well,
Well, no, there's a lot of other rules that we think need to be fixed. The cemetery administrator admitted that there were some other
I think
things
they're
that need to be
clarifying some
fixed.
things that we should take.
And we want, this was a compromise position, that we would wait for them to fix those things later.
Right,
But
so
we
we'll
needed
wait
to-
to,
but that's
We
a
needed to
legitimate-
accomplish several things this town meeting, like changing the address and getting rid of the Harwich Center Cemetery, so we've done those things.
But what Ed's motion is actually an appropriate motion to list it as no action pending further information.
right. That's what I thought we were going with.
Yeah,
Just-
well, I don't know. We
I-
just ask them to
I
wait, I
agree.
think.
Just the material we included from Finance Committee does have their motion that was adopted 6-1. Is there additional changes that are going to be made, or is,
Yeah, just, if you look at,
you may want to still wait, but I just, the language doesn't.
Is it-
Seconded his motion.
at Section 2 internments, there's a rule number 5 that has to do with the Harwich Center Cemetery that was left in there by them, but they didn't strike it, so we're striking it because we're striking that cemetery from our list,
Right, so we'll,
like that.
yeah, so we'll
Oh,
still,
you still want to hold off until we
Yeah.
get the final language?
so we'll go with,
What are you
It was
going to
Ed's motion.
Ed's motion was,
Let's vote.
Aye.
Their
Aye.
recommendation.
all in favor? Aye, all opposed?
No
Right,
recommendation.
no recommendation.
Waiting for further information.
That was painful. Uh,
You're gonna miss
32.
us.
Madam Chair, I move we take a position supporting Article 32, Cemetery Arboretum Project Mapping and Software.
Second.
Move,
But we did do that. If we do it 4-0, that'll be 9-0.
no, we voted it, this is supporting it.
This is voting to support it.
This is
We
supporting
didn't vote
it.
to support it, we just,
We voted to include it.
no.
We didn't on the support.
We'll do it again.
Well, we're doing it again, just because we want to, Dan.
While you're watching the tape, we're gonna vote.
Okay. Did you make a motion?
Yeah.
He did, and
Did
I
you
seconded.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Just on the agenda, just to Dana's point, and it's a good point, it has budget articles 1 through 37, and you have Article 31 specifically listed here, so you may have
Oh,
already
did we
taken
jump
action.
over to that?
Yeah.
Okay,
that's
never
all.
mind.
We're gonna forge on until next year's
Because
articles.
your next one for consideration, I believe, is Article 66, because you did vote the
Housing trust.
Affordable Housing Trust already.
Oh, all right. So we're now at
66 or 6? Yeah.
66, stabilization.
Yep.
All right,
You could do 6, 7, and 8.
Well, let's see if I can find it
I
again.
know.
Wonderful thing about Dropbox is that occasionally you hit something and it all disappears.
While you're looking, I'll make this motion in
Why
then.
don't you do that?
I move we support the Article 66, the stabilization fund.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
I move we support Article 67, the OPEB trust fund.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
I move we support Article 68, fund prior years unpaid bills.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
And
Just
I'll,
you and I.
and of course, the most controversial one is I'll move we support Article 69, herring fishers.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Well,
Oh, you're gonna talk about,
I'll refrain from giving my
Good.
comments on the most historical significance of this article.
Good.
save that.
We'll have
Or
Marge
actually-
Marion in to come talk about it.
Actually quite critical to the starting,
No,
beginning days
No,
of
you said you
Harwich.
were not
It
gonna
is,
do it.
actually.
So,
Okay,
it's
I'm with
tabled
Ed on
for
that.
town meeting, so all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. So town administrators report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple things on the Safe Routes to School infrastructure program. I did report at the last meeting that we had gone through Phase 1. We have been accepted. This is a Monomoy application that the board has supported. They are looking for a formal letter of support, so I will try to put something together and hopefully have it in for the next meeting packet. But just to, I think we provided the material. I don't know if I had provided the material last time. And
Can you
then,
include the actual grant itself so that we know what we're writing the letter of support for?
yeah, if you want to see the grant again, it was in
We did
before.
have it
but
before.
We can get that for you. And then, kind of, on the $50,000 for the DHY effort, we've been asked to, and I gotta dig into this because they did a submission and it looked like they submitted on our behalf. I said, yes, this is a submission on our behalf, and then they said, well, we still need the application. So I don't exactly know what the state's looking for on this, but I will dig into that and find out if we need an additional vote to do it. But I believe the board had voted to support that grant submission for $50,000 to continue to have CDM do the work on the DHY initiative.
and in fairness, this has been a somewhat lengthy discussion in our committee meetings because there's a time involved. If you gotten a grant within the last year, they don't want you to apply again. And so people from other towns are trying to remember when they got their last grants, so.
We didn't
We'll
think
need to
we were
work it through.
eligible, but now they're saying we are eligible, so we need to submit.
And so if Michael's watching this, the other point to be made is, we're asking for the additional money because of what we talked about previously in the meeting. We did not get the legislation, we're not ready to roll,
Right.
and we have to have some more meetings and support at those meetings in order to do this.
The next one is just the, we did get a notice that we have, as part of being a part of Cape Cod Municipal Health Group, there was money that was contributed that was reimbursed to not just the town, but all the towns in the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group. It is related to health insurance, so the recommendation is to put it into the OPEB trust, and that number is $521,925. So just over a $500,000, a good amount to put into the trust. I believe from the legal documents that we've reviewed that we will have to have a town meeting vote to put that in. Whether we put that in as under the OPEB trust or put it in under budget adjustments in FY19. I think we'll probably have to put it in under budget adjustments for FY19, but we will reflect that in the motion. And then on the preliminary impact on the plastic bottle ban, I believe after last week's meeting, I had a department head meeting on Tuesday morning, had specifically requested for town departments to look at the element of a ban on dispensing or utilizing plastic bottles. And I know the fire chief is still here and the deputy if they want to comment on it. But they had specifically indicated that during some of their events that bottled water is something that is normally distributed to firefighters and to residents that perhaps are burned out of their facilities. So it is kind of critical to their operation for emergency management. Lynn Cooper, our DPW director, had also commented on this. He was more concerned that because of the language, the proposed plastic ban containers would not only include water, but milk, OJ, and several other beverages commercially available. And during their emergencies, during snow removal operations, they do prepare meals for people as they're driving. That doesn't include plastic containers. So there was concern in regards to that. And these comments are in, or should hopefully be in the packet. So they're available just in light of the hour, and just kind of trying to paraphrase. He does bring up an interesting point, which I had not really thought about, that the article reads, the dispensing of water or any beverages in plastic containers prohibited on all town property. I believe Selectman McManus had brought up that any kind of cranberry festival, anything on a public way, a public beach, technically would be in violation of this. So, you know, he raises a few additional concerns that I don't know how we would actively enforce, to be perfectly honest. But I wanted to at least provide that information back to the board. And these are preliminary reports.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
And that concludes my comments this evening, Madam Chair.
A comment on that, I attended a forum in Brewster on the wastewater ban, or the wastewater, plastic bottle ban. And the proponents of it were there doing the presentation, and they themselves have understood the problematic use of the word dispense, and are in the process of coming up with some amended language to take care of that, because technically, you know, a person who comes from home, you know, a mom and dad and 4 kids, and sit down on the beach and have a plastic water, and they open it up and start pouring it, well, that's technically dispensing, and you'd have to have the lifeguard tell them that they have to leave the beach. I mean, you know, it just, so that was a very problematic term, and they've understood that, so.
Thank you. Don?
Or soda.
Huh?
Or soda.
Yeah, well, anything, but, you know.
I'm good.
No, I just meant, did you have a report?
Selectmen's,
I wasn't asking for you.
I'm done.
Larry?
No, thanks.
Okay, I have nothing.
You have nothing?
I move we adjourn.
I got nothing. Move to adjourn.
Second.